you sure about this? It has been a long time since you've dealt with something like this. If I don't take control for this one, they'll keep hounding you for me. I can't let you bear all of that burden. Besides, I've had an entire year to prepare for this, and I think I'm ready to show them what I'm made of. Just be careful, okay? Last time we dealt with these witches, they managed to lock us up within our own studio. God help us what they might have stored for us this time. We've dealt with worse in our time, right? Just leave it in my hands. I'll make sure our vessel is safe from those tricks. You better be right about this. God help us both if the Prime finds out we've fucked up the vessel. I can only keep her distracted for so long, so try and keep this as compact as you can. See you on the other side too. Well, this is different. Oh. God, I should have known something like this would happen this time. Nothing can ever. Wait, that's...
Your vessel. Correct. Glad to see you finally joined us for our game, oh dear reviewer.
Okay, I've been through a lot of these in the past, and I think I deserve to ask the obvious question. What the hell is this about?
Quick to demand answers, aren't we? Well, if you desire them so much, let me explain the rules of our game. Your vessel will represent you on the board for tonight's proceedings. Your challenge, and theirs by proxy, will be the same as last time, but with the story of Umineko when they cry to unravel, dissect, and give your dear thoughts on. The only win condition is that you must complete all 8 episodes in the sound novel, manga, and yes, even the anime as well. And you must do them all in a sufficient enough manner to be able to survive this game between us. If you win, you're free from us and these yearly games until the end of, well, your days anyway. Lose, however, and your collective is to be our playthings until the end of time.
Is that all? Not like I've been the plaything of some other eldritch being before. And unlike you, witch, I've at least been able to overcome my own issues and be able to move on with them already. But, in regards to your game, I have one amendment to make. We're only covering the question arcs in this round.
Excuse me?
The question arcs are the only ones being covered in this round of the game. Do you need me to repeat it again?
You are not here to make amendments to this game. It's of my design, and you are my opposition!
And this is where I take issue with your game then up front. Because if you designed this game to work properly, then covering all of Umineko in one go simply isn't doable. Have you even play-tested this thing yet? Honestly.
You dare mock me! Where do you get off trying to criticize my game when you haven't even begun it yet?
Have you even read Umineko, Golden Witch? As my vessel will go through in just a moment, it's just not the same as going through the entirety of Higurashi in one evening's events. And even then, the vessel was so exhausted from the whole affair that it managed to awaken me after so many years because of that little call-out that you did to us last time and damn near sent our collective into a panic. So unless your goal is to break your toys before they're bought, Beatrice, I suggest you heed my amendment to your game.
Very well, but know this. Regardless of the result of this first round, you will return a year from tonight to finish your work. You understand this will happen regardless of your circumstances as a result of opening the door into this game yourself, dear reviewer.
Glad you see reason finally, Witch. So how about we get started on this little game of yours now, huh?
I thought you'd never ask, dear reviewer. Let our game begin!
So, If you're coming in late from last year's video or don't have a background on Ryukishi 07's past and his works from last year, here's a cliff notes of last year's video on Higurashi. Ryukishi 07 is an absolutely crazy bastard who pivoted from stage play writing to creating visual novels when his lone writing effort didn't pan out the way he wanted it to, hence creating Higurashi no Nakakoro or Higurashi When They Cry as a series of sound novels from 2002 to 2006, which in turn created the animes in 2006 to 2008, and even today, which are known, beloved, and especially seen as important. When we last spoke a year ago, I left you all off on the cliffhanger of Higurashi's success in 2006 becoming such a massive tidal wave that Ryukishi himself immediately went to work on a follow-up for the When They Cry franchise. That being taking the themes that were presented originally in Higurashi and putting them on the reader's head. And given the fact that Higurashi had managed to set records at Banquet several times over with its sales at the event in each subsequent time it had been presented by 07th Expansion, and with the ending of it garnering such wildfire success across all mediums from manga to audio dramas to their animes, it only very well led to Ryukishi and 7th Expansion deciding to set out on their next big venture as a collective. So, in 2006, they began work on the next big step of the When They Cry franchise, something of which would reward the reader's patience and attention to detail, as it would punish them hard for their insolence. It would show them the truth behind the mysteries surrounding it needs to be found in something that the readers may not fully understand. And above all else, it would show its readers that even the most perfect of mysteries can be solved through clear and reasonable deducing. I am, of course, talking about the infamous, the monolith, the arguable magnum opus of Ryukishi 07's entire career, When the Seagulls Cry, When They Cry Umineko, or just simply Umineko no Nakakoro ni.
And so, here we are, talking about quite possibly one of the most dense and intricate stories I have ever come across in my time, not just as an indulger of anime and manga and what have you, but as a fan of mystery itself. Because while Higurashi was a story about bonds and how you're able to defy fate through the power of friendship, Umineko is a story about a lot more than that. But it takes that concept of bonds, move it from the wider aspect of bonds within community to bonds within family and across time, and further adds in aspects that Higurashi touched upon, and expanding out further from those concepts. We'll touch upon it more when we get into the beast itself, but I want to clear the air about something real quick. I'm only going to be covering the first 4 episodes of the story: Legend of the Golden Witch, Turn of the Golden Witch, Banquet of the Golden Witch, and Alliance of the Golden Witch in this part. And before any of you ask me as to why I'm only covering one half of it compared to Higurashi last year, let me make my point by showing you all something real quick. This is how big the story of Onikakushi Hen, the first arc of Higurashi, was in manga form when we discussed it a year ago. It's only about 2 tankobon volumes for what it's worth visually. By comparison, this thick boy right here is only 1 volume of Legend of the Golden Witch's manga form that we will be discussing today. Trust me when I say that if we were going to talk about all of Umineko in the same way that I did Higurashi 1 year ago, given how many volumes of these sizes there are for later entries, we wouldn't be here all night. We'd be here for the entire duration of the 2 days the Ushiromiya family was stuck on Rokkenjima. But that's for when we eventually get into the topic of the story itself. You're probably also wondering how this even got made to begin with, right?
Well, not much has really changed in regards to 7th Expansion as a collective between the end of Higurashi and the start of Umineko, with one lone exception that I will touch upon when we discuss End of the Golden Witch next time. As I feel, it's a pivotal moment not just for the story of Umineko, but also the overall processes behind the scenes at 7th Expansion period. As made mention previously in Higurashi's creative process, however, 4U leaves before Umineko begins production. Reasons to this day are unclear. It's assumed to be an amicable split. In their place, however, many people were brought on board, such as Neko Sakura, the collective's first female member, who served as a system worker and scriptwriter for Umineko under Yatarazuka. There are a couple new additions to the collective as well outside of Neko Sakura, but they will not become relevant until we at least reach Dawn of the Golden Witch, so let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. Now, compared to where we were a year ago when I discussed Higurashi, Umineko's creation was very much kept locked down, as while Higurashi had a lot of what it was inspired by told us by Ryukishi in the years after the fact, what inspired Umineko has been mostly kept a secret by the man himself. While it hasn't been directly stated by him, however, many people have pointed out similarities between this story and the works of mystery novel writers like Agatha Christie, and specifically the story And Then There Were None, of which the basic premise is thought to have been directly lifted from during the time of its release. Alongside that, many often cite similarities to certain aspects of bits and bobs we'll be covering later on past the first episode of Umineko to Dante's Divine Comedy. But we'll look into what kind of inspirations that takes from when we reach Turn of the Golden Witch, as to not spoil any major aspects for anyone who is experiencing Umineko for the first time.
But honestly here, if you're trying to get into Umineko through these videos, stop. I can't believe I have to say this, but in no way is this a replacement for actually experiencing Umineko for yourself. Much like in my Higurashi video 1 year ago, or even when we looked at Utena 2 years ago now, this is a condensed version of the story only, and I will not be covering everything in this video for the question arcs. If you want to experience Umineko in the best way possible, I recommend either reading the sound novels, which you can find on Steam usually at a very good price point when sales roll around, or through the manga, which is sadly out of print and is often very elusive to people with budgets, but can easily be found on certain archives on the internet. And if you're thinking to yourself, Chloe, there's an anime of the first 4 episodes, can't I just watch that like what I did with Higurashi? No. To be blunt about it, unlike what they did with Higurashi, Umineko's anime was so butchered to the original story from the sound novels that many people consider it like Tsukihime's anime adaptation, or Canon's first anime adaptation. They write it off entirely because it was so awful and leaves out so much from it that anyone who recommends it is considered a troll, and not the good kind, as we'll be getting into shortly. So, for the purposes of this video, I will be using footage from it for visual purposes only to show what was kept in from all 3 versions. But we'll switch to the manga version to show you all the bits the anime didn't keep in. Do not consider this an endorsement for the anime in any way, shape, or form by me using that footage. And with that, realistically, that's all of our background work covered for this. We have a lot of ground to cover in this one, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the story of Umineko by revealing the legend of the Golden Witch.
We start off our long, arduous journey throughout the story of Seacats with a much different opening than what had been displayed to us during Higurashi. As while we were thrown heavily into the deep end with Keiji smashing his baseball bat into Mirror and Reno to start us off as a flash forward, in Umineko, our cold open into episode 1 of this saga has us being introduced to the head of the Ushiromiya family itself, Kinzo Ushiromiya, of whom being told by his in-house Dr. Nanjo that his health has reached critical illness, with his servants in full view to show that this is in fact a rich family here. We see that this old elderly man is pining for someone to come see him once more, or for him to see them. That being of a woman in a largely framed painting in the residence of Rokkenjima, the patriarch of the Ushiromiya family, Kinzo, calling out to it as his beloved Beatrice, practically wailing for her presence before he should pass. The storm outside Rokkenjima practically foreboding his wish, settling our mood into the story of the family in a way which, one could argue, is just as unsettling as Higurashi's opening moments. And much like Higurashi, not that long after this moment are we flung into a whiplash-inducing sunny day at the airport, where we are introduced to the rest of the main cast of characters that will make up this story, each coming from their own subsection of the family. We have our main guy, Battler, his father Rudolph, and stepmother Kyrie, missing sister Edge, who is homesick, Jessica and her parents Kraus and Natsuki, George and his parents Ava and Hideyoshi, and finally, Maria and her mother Rosa. All of them together make up the extended Ushiromiya family coming together for their family conference, of which only happens every 6 years. More or less the family reunion with a lot more family politics and whatnot involved in it. With the scenes at the airport and subsequent boat ride to the island of Rokkenjima serving as an introduction to the cast, their main dynamics, and what they bring to the table in terms of the next 8 episodes. All of them ranging from the stuffiest of stuck-up archetypes, the entire spectrum of misogyny and teenage angst that will make you wonder if any of them truly deserve to live by the end of this affair. And then there's just Maria, who had been a playful child most of the time, suddenly chanting about a missing structure on the island being an omen of great disaster as they dock on the island. While many are wanting to dismiss her calls and more serious tone as being a bit childish, this is going to play into many factors of what is to come and is, in my opinion, the first warning shot that this won't be like Higurashi. This isn't going to be a slow burn to the point of it all. As Kumasawa, one of the attendants of the estate, states the legends of there being a witch living on Rokkenjima, Jessica, who lives on the island with her parents and Kinzo, immediately shoots it down as if feeling like she knows more than she lets on. Lets the readers know with Maria's sudden reaction to that things are not what they seem. And that despite what its length of each story may present, this is in actuality going to be one of the most engaging stories you've read, and this setup to its big moments will lull you into a false sense of security. This continues on to the docking sequence of Rokkenjima, with the family interactions continuing to lull the reader into believing that despite the sort of weird warning from Maria, everything is fine. Even despite Battler getting a weird vibe on his own when they step on shore and notice the seagulls are gone from the beach. The walk from the shore to the manor of the island itself has a few key moments of note. One being a bit more of details being given on Kinzo and his apparent obsession with the occult, with Maria making mention of it being the thing that keeps him locked away constantly over his obsession with Beatrice. The second one being as they walk through the manor's garden, with Maria finding a lone flower in the garden that she declares to be more misshapen than the rest of them. Finding interest in the rose itself, George puts a candy wrapper Maria had and ties it around the rose for Maria to find later.
Both of these will be interesting moments in particular that I want you to put in the back of your mind's eye for later, as one will become something that gets revisited a lot in later explorations of character, and the other is a moment in which will be critical to the development of another character in particular. It may not be obvious right now which one is which, but trust me, it is going to be important down the line.
It's during these moments as well that we are introduced to fellow servants of the house in Cannon and Shannon, whom have the interest of both Jessica and George respectively, the two of them however referring to themselves as furniture, believing themselves as servants of the Ushiromiya household to be lesser beings. While this is also an introduction to the central cast of the island, the two of whom will be part of the central group of characters we follow along with the focus of this journey, it's also a way to introduce us more to the dynamics romantically outside the parents of the Ushiromiya family. We'll come back to the reasoning as to why it's so important to focus on their romantic relationships as the story progresses on, but the way that they subtly sprinkle it into these early moments makes it clear that it's not going to take the viewer for granted for paying attention this early on. While this happens, however, focusing in more on the events of the story more and more, we get reports of a typhoon incoming onto the island of Rokkenjima, set to make landfall overnight. While this does cause much concern for the children brought along to the conference, it does little to wilter their spirits leading into the afternoon portion of events. However, they come across something on their way to the dining hall that immediately catches Battler off by surprise. That being of a large portrait of a woman in a beautiful dress with the crest of the Ushiromiya family. That being of a one-winged eagle on her as she stares almost expressionlessly at the viewer. Almost as if, like the Mona Lisa itself, drawing the gaze of whoever looks upon it, Battler questions what or who this painting is, with Maria and the others instantly proclaiming it to be of Beatrice, the Witch of Rokkenjima. Jessica, George, and even Maria all talking about the legend of the witch herself, reminding him and introducing the audience to the eponymous story of Beatrice for the first time, while not explicitly telling anything of it to make the mystery surrounding her legend more enticing as it goes on. Battler notices it in a way of shock due to that fact as, in the absence of 6 years, the painting was only hung up 2 years prior, something of which has been normalized to the rest of the family members by now, while he's yet to properly process why such a large, imposing portrait is hung up in such a prominent location. The mystery surrounding both the family and the witch continue to be prevalent throughout the remainder of this early portion, if only in the background as the rest of the family try to convince Kinzo to join them for lunch, much to his chagrin as he tells them to bugger off, even threatening murder on them as he keeps muttering away to himself. Of course, while everyone is quick to make little comments of Kinzo's interest in the occult, Battler quickly makes a comment of there being no such thing as witches immediately raises the ire of Maria, who immediately begins to fight back on his claims, while she is calmed down by George during this bit. It's another little key detail to keep in the back of your mind for later. Of course, while the afternoon lunch does go on, we are given more insight to each of the different dynamics of the family with each other, while also introducing their own individual rankings in the line of succession within the family, and what it means as a result. We also, as a result, see more of their characters come forth as they discuss the events of the last year leading up to the conference, while also initiating some very interesting situations with comments made by members of the family regarding Battler, specifically Maria, who comments on wanting to grow up so she could be molested by him. What the fuck, Ryukishi? Aside from that, however, Battler's absence for 6 years makes good ice-breaking conversation for all involved. You'd even think maybe that despite the eerie nature of events leading up to this, that maybe they may have some goodwill towards each other after all. Especially when we're introduced to other servers like Goda, who's the chef that makes the meals that they're eating this trip. But it's when Shannon appears to mess up some crucial details of serving the meal, such as a sour sauce for dessert and a tea not being brewed correctly, is when the cracks begin to show a little bit.
And look, all due respect to Shannon, but tea making is a fine art. I've made enough cups of tea for these retrospectives by now that it's almost nothing. So it's not exactly something that you can just dump with milk and sugar like coffee and expect it to be salvaged. Huh. I think I might have overbrewed this one, actually.
However, it's in the following moments that we get a bit of interactions between the servants of the house, as Kaden and Shannon both discuss how Ava and Natsuhi more or less blamed her for it. Kaden further blaming Gerda for not doing anything to help Shannon, who appears to not be as experienced. These interactions, inclusive of Genji as the senior servant of the house, form another side of the coin when it comes to those who will be shown as it continues on, as while they will absolutely be shown to be as important as the rest of the Ushiromiya family by the end. Following on, however, while the young ones and Shannon go off to the beach before the typhoon makes land, the masks slip off the elderly members of the family, as they immediately get to discussing the matter of Kinzo's inheritance. As soon as they bring it up, the vitriol amongst the offspring of the old man immediately becomes clear. Ava being the quickest one to throw barbs as she accuses his direct successor in Kraus and Natsuhi by extension of using the fortune of the Ushiromiya family to make up for bad investments. Natsuhi and Ava showing immediate disdain for each other. Natsuhi for Ava's poor attitude towards Kraus and her, Ava for Natsuhi thinking she outranks her. Unfortunately, this being set in the 80s means that Kraus immediately brings her back into line as soon as things begin to turn ugly. Natsuhi running away as even her own husband will not come to her own defense. The rest of the adults pretty much holding Kraus at a metaphorical gunpoint to get a split of 750 million out of the Ushiromiya fortune, not to speak of his embezzlement. However, Kraus makes it clear that he doesn't even have the funds himself to be able to get that kind of blackmail to them, reprimanding them all for trying to bleed them dry when they have their own issues with money of their own, from businesses-related issues to legal disputes and loan debt. Every single member of the Ushiromiya's is in financial hell. Ava then brings up something of which will become a continued staple for each episode to come. The discussion of Kinzo's depository of gold bars, believing Kraus to have hoarded them all for his own gain, much to his displeasure. But Kinzo himself is aware that they're all discussing said details, as he gets Cannon to tell them of the details, leading us in turn with Battler to learn more of the epitaph underneath Beatrice's portrait, as Kinzo declares he will follow its instructions and revive the witch Beatrice. The epitaph itself, while an important piece of information regarding the overall aspects of Umineko, will become another core ingredient throughout its mystery, as the instructions within its words will both serve as figurative and literal keys throughout the remainder of this story. So while it may freak out Battler and its first-time readers as they try to process what is being read underneath the portrait for Beatrice of themselves, it's something that we will be revisiting constantly throughout our time on Rokkenjima. However, the rest of the kids do end up enjoying a little relaxing afternoon on the beach while the adults bicker over each other, all the while discussing the epitaph for themselves as Maria had written it down for her own records, which more serves for them to have little comical moments of deduction, while Maria is off in the corner being a bit creepy doodling in the sand. During all of this as well, they discuss how the epitaph relates to Kinzo's obtaining of the gold he received, believing his words that he sold his soul to the witch Beatrice to be a code for his obtaining of it through business deals, to which Maria once again interrupts, saying that Beatrice is in fact real, beginning to even get a bit upset that the others don't believe in her like she does. Adding into her fascination with Beatrice and other bits and bobs of the occult, she hands Battler, Jessica, and George all medallions that she believes will block any form of evil spirits. While these seemingly handmade trinkets with scorpions embalmed on them may seem insignificant now, these will be something to keep in mind as well in the future, as, just as Maria says to the other siblings, they'll be important to ensure their safety later on. The approval from Battler regarding their intent allowing Maria to perk up a bit as they look to make their way to the mansion as the weather begins to pick up in a bad way. However, Maria's concern over the rose she had pointed out before has them making a detour on their way back, and when Maria is unable to find the rose in particular she knows is in one area of the rose garden, it causes her to have a meltdown over this, causing Rosa in return, who had stepped out to find them, to begin to get a bit frustrated with her as a result, and...
God, we're really back to the child abuse angle here, huh? It's almost as if Ryukishi had a thing for focusing on shitty parents being abusive because he had a personal history working as a social worker or something.
But, yes, this is the first instance we get of Rosa and Maria's dynamic not exactly being all that well balanced, as, while there were small hints of her being more than capable of being frustrated by Maria's antics and general behavior during the prologue before they got on the boat, moments of which are cut out from all but the sound novel iterations, this is the first instance that we get that Rosa could be seen as an abusive parent, as she berates Maria for her behavior and openly slaps her in front of the others without remorse.
Now, there are many different ways of seeing this depending on which angle you wish to view this from. Be it viewing this particular scene as Rosa being a more sterner, conservative parent that was common at the time of its setting, or even potentially it being a show of how Rosa's generational trauma has affected her as a mother with the stress she's under as a single parent. There is another way specifically of looking at it as well, and we'll 100% be looking at it from a wider lens at the end of this part. But for now, it's much like everything else in Umineko, unexplained, but unfortunately very much one you have to take at face value until we get more information to properly dissect it. But trust me, when we do have that information, content warnings will be abound for that entire fucking thing.
Regardless, as the storm begins to pick up and the rest of the kids get inside, Maria continues to search for her rose while they contemplate their circumstances within the storm. Jessica specifically stating about how trapped and constrained she feels living on Rokkenjima during this section. We don't have much time to properly focus on those aspects, however, as the servers come to collect the children for dinner. However, Rosa in tow realizes that Maria has yet to come inside with them, going along with all of them to try and find her, with her sitting in the courtyard with an umbrella seemingly still trying to find her rose. Rosa, begging for forgiveness from Maria, brings her and the others inside, with Kinzo once again denying himself from joining everyone else. We're instead given our next proper bit of storytelling as everyone involved suddenly asks themselves how Maria suddenly had an umbrella outside when she didn't before, only for her to say that she borrowed it from Beatrice. This is the moment where things suddenly begin to ramp up, both for the mystery aspect of the story as much as it does the interpersonal stress between all involved, as Maria is adamant that she was given it by Beatrice while everyone else at the table is questioning each other on who gave her the umbrella. From the parents questioning the kids to even questioning if the servants are in on it with Kinzo to keep the mystery of Beatrice alive, they continuously poke and prod, all while Maria menacingly continues saying it wasn't any of them, finally relenting with her revealing a letter with Kinzo's seal on it, but it's addressed from Beatrice herself to everyone. While it immediately catches everyone off guard, as Maria leaked a lengthy letter addressed to the entire Ushiromiya family. It states that Kinzo made an agreement with her years ago and is now looking to pay up not just with the family's supply of gold that he has for the inheritance, but the entirety of the Ushiromiya family alongside it, with the only condition of this being the case is to solve the riddle of the epitaph, find the location of the gold for themselves, and, as a result, forfeit the Golden Witch's right to the gold forever. Naturally, this causes the adults in the room, who have already been established to be money-hungry bastards, immediately hound Kinzo's door asking for an explanation. However, Kinzo simply enjoys his dinner and tells Genji, his longest-standing servant, he has done well in hoping that they are reunited should he be sacrificed in the end. The chaos only continuing to unfold, much to the dismay of their children, as they all begin infighting amongst one each other, with the others questioning the validity of the gold in the first place, to which Kraus reveals to Natsuhi the fact of it being true when he shows her a gold ignot with the Ushiromiya crest sealed into it. Feeling betrayed already by her husband over being thrown aside earlier in the day, this pushes her over the edge mentally, with Jessica finding her before she goes into a full-on meltdown, comforting her mother and handing her the charm of protection that Maria gave her earlier in the day as well to help her.
Like most things in the story, you'll be wanting to pay attention to small key details like this for the long road ahead. They're being shown in plain sight because we're this early on, but the game masters will not be so lenient on those hints in the future.
However, while the rest of the family is in disarray over the predicament surrounding Beatrice's letter, Battler is beside himself trying to figure out who could be behind it, when none other than Kyrie comes in and tries to help him sort through the thoughts on the matter, leading to them both coming to the conclusion of there being a 19th person on the island if nobody else could be behind the letter or Maria's umbrella. However, that is only one of the many theories brought about, as a secondary idea floated that perhaps someone on the island simply did masquerade as Beatrice, and is pulling the wool over everyone's eyes in order to do so, putting into place a method of guesswork which involves looking at the situation from the perspective of one's opponent. Dubbed as flipping the chessboard by Kyrie, she urges Battler to try and see it from the perspective of the one claiming to be Beatrice, and how they could have used Maria, someone impressionable and easily manipulated, to be used as part of their schemes while keeping themselves hidden from the rest of those on the island in order to do this. However, when Rudolph comes in, suddenly wanting to talk to him about something in particular, believing if he doesn't that he won't get a chance to do so as he fears he'll be dead by the night's end. It leads to him showing concern, if at the same time showing us the Battler has a bit of a conflicted relationship with him, given his absence the last 6 years was caused by Rudolph remarrying Kyrie. Kyrie, however, follows along to see what's up with him while Battler reconvenes with the rest of the children alongside Shannon, who discusses about her and Cannon are like siblings, however not related by blood, in the way that they were brought up together at the same orphanage and, as members of servants at the Ushiromiya house, expanding more of their personal lore as the more slower-paced moments of the opening act continue. However, while Shannon appears to be the more free-spirited of the two with how she wishes to be more proactive in spending time with George, Cannon is hooked in deep to the mentality that he is nothing more than his role as servant or furniture, as is made mention throughout these proceedings. With Shannon, this gives her a perfect opportunity, alongside George, to be able to properly express their feelings for each other. In particular, George, who goes so far as to propose to Shannon as a way of being able to properly try and free her from the more rigid life as a servant of the Ushiromiya house. While no answer is given at the time, all George asks is for her to heavily consider it, with the impression being that if she were seriously to do so, she may very well say yes. But given that this is only one part of a when they cry story of all things, While it does give you hope that maybe these two lovebirds could potentially win out, it's a cruel reminder that we still have a long way to go. And as the clock strikes midnight on October the 5th, signaling the end of the night of the first day, as the servants tend to the house, the adults continue to bicker on about the gold, and their children idly keep themselves busy, the true beginning of our story finally kicks in. As the next day comes in, the rain from the typhoon still raging on at 6 a.m. in the morning. Natsuhi awakens having had the best night's sleep in a while, putting the thanks to the charm that Jessica gave her. She's told that Goda is missing by the other servants and that the phone lines are down due to the storm. The strife begins with bloody handprints marking over Goda's room as they try to come and find him, being branded as a tasteless prank by the other members of staff and Natsuhi herself. However, once Canon reports that Rudolph, Kraus, Kyrie, and Rosa are also suspiciously missing, do things suddenly begin to seem more dire. While Ava is quick to try and stir the pot over all of them potentially getting up and at it more into the evening, to the degree of trying to get into Kinzo's study to rile up Natsuhi, Genji gives her a key to try and see if this is true, only to find Kinzo alone in his study, albeit still continuing to be furious over the continued arguing over his inheritance, calling the family vultures for doing so. However, before Natsuhi is scared off, he does give her a more kinder side before she leaves his quarters, with Natsuhi being given a speech to the level of saying that while she did feel some regret over leaving her old life behind, she doesn't regret marrying into the Ushiromiya family. Kinzo responding that while she doesn't wear the one-winged eagle on her garments like the rest of the members of his bloodline, he states with earnest that she wears it on her heart, using it as a way to assure her that despite the comments made by the rest of the family, she is deserving of being in it as much as the rest of his offspring.
This moment will come to be one of the most heartwarming moments in the short term of the question arcs, and one of the most heartbreaking moments in the long term. For those who have gone through the entire journey, you know exactly what I mean by this. But for now, it gives the character of Natsuhi a very much needed reprieve after dealing with so much strife in the first day of the conference. Unfortunately, however, this will be one of the last good moments that Natsuhi gets this part, as it's all downhill from here.
As the children awaken to join the rest of the family in the main house, Canon reports of an anomaly at the greenhouse tool shed, that being of a mysteriously ominous magic circle over the front of it. Genji being informed of the event and the children sans Maria following after the remaining elders as they open up the shed door. And while Natsuhi tells them to stay away from the door and to return back to the house, as they come close enough to see what is inside, they both learn the unfortunate truth as what has happened, as well as come to realize that the game has finally begun. Inside the greenhouse shed are the bodies of the missing Genji, Rudolph, Kraus, Kyrie, Rosa, and, to the shock of George especially, Shannon, whose faces have been completely mangled to the degree that had they not been wearing their clothes, they would be completely unrecognizable. To the strife and agony of everyone involved, the game of Beatrice has indeed begun. She's taken her first 6 sacrifices in the night, however it's informed that they should have a different lock for it installed as whomever had been able to lock it was someone who had the keys. Main suspicion being one of the remaining servants or someone who took keys from them, Natsuhi keeping the keys for herself until further notice. The rest of the family reconvenes in the main house, everyone still being in distress over the events of the first set of sacrifices for Beatrice's game. All but one, however, Maria questioning the events of what has happened, and once she realizes that the events are correlating to Beatrice's will, her expression and demeanor immediately flips. And really, this shouldn't be a surprise at all to all involved, as next to Kinzo probably, Maria is one of the bigger people in this entire family who is obsessed with the occult, and has made it apparent since nearly her first appearance in the story that she has probably got a lot more going on in there, maybe at the surface level. Hell, even Battler points this out as while everyone else is grieving for their loved ones who are dead they only found mere hours ago, Maria is still sitting in the corner watching her shows, almost as if ambivalent to the entire thing, or maliciously being ignorant to the fact her mother is dead and the loved ones of others are too. But of course, that isn't the only thing that feels off about the entire affair, as Ava points out to Battler that the only people that would have had access to the keys necessarily to be able to commit the deed would have been the servants, plainly stating that if they were found out given how many there are remaining, that it wouldn't let the rest of the family leave the island alive. Ava, however, states the plainly obvious that the only one who had anything to gain from the deaths of her siblings would be herself, as it would leave her the sole remaining child of Kenzo alive and therefore the only one with any right to his inheritance, boldly trying to tell Battler that if she really wanted to do it, however, she wouldn't have killed them. It's only when they tried to figure out what the symbol of what was on the door was, however, upon asking Maria, who seems to be the only expert on this subject remaining alive, that things absolutely begin to shift for the worse, as Maria finally lets the mask slip.
You remember how I said back in the Higurashi retrospective a year ago how Rena's Yusoda moment was the moment that would be a make or break moment for a lot of people experiencing the series for the first time? In which it was either going to be a moment that either sold you or would turn you off it entirely? Well, the first set of murders being found in the shed was definitely the first of these moments for sure. Maria's sudden complete switch up of behavior in any version of the story being presented, yes, even in the anime, God forbid, is actually the moment which sold me on Umineko back in the day because it had been built up over the course of the majority of Legend's opening act. But it's also admittedly a point of contention for those going through the story for the first time, as following on from this moment, it proceeds to make Maria look like the expert on everything that is happening, and is prone to talking down to the rest of everyone involved. And if you're even not prepared to have this happen for the rest of Legend, or if you can't find it appropriate that Maria, of all people, is suddenly taking control of the situation, then it's very likely you might not enjoy the rest of the story, not just episode 1, but Umineko entirely. It's a bit of a shame too, because, speaking candidly here, while I did not enjoy this at first, Maria's actually a top 5 character for me personally, and even I can admit it took a bit for me to properly appreciate her, and her appearance throughout Legend isn't all there is to her as a character.
But for what we do get in this moment going forward, plainly spelling out the summoning circle used on the shed as being used to say the witch has been freed and that the 6 were sacrificed according to her agreement, while it's obvious to the viewer by this point, the shocked expressions on everyone else's face make it clear by now that they are in the deep end. Ballo, however, taking heed from the words given to him by Rudolph and Kyrie in the past, immediately gets to work as our protagonists try to prove that it isn't the work of a witch, and whomever is doing it is amongst all of them still alive. Nazi, on the other hand, comes back with another solution: packing heat. Distributing a set of firearms kept in the mansion for everyone's protection, only adding more fuel to the fire of paranoia and distrust among the living. Ava and Nazi both being on 2 different sides deciding who the killer is, believing it to be someone of those in the house and someone separate entirely from the daily respectively, causing even more paranoia to brew. However, among the servants, they all very much believe the tales of the witch from Kinzo to be real and true, creating a subsection of those alive, including Maria, who do in fact believe the person doing all of the murders to in fact be the Golden Witch Beatrice, and the only ones who saved were the ones who had charms, or believed in her. But Battler, realizing that the Maria he's talking to right now isn't the same one he was talking to the day prior, lets loose his niceties surrounding her and plainly tells her that he doesn't even have the charm she gave him, that he doesn't believe in Beatrice, and even gives a flick to the head of Maria for good measure.
This moment more or less sets in place that Battler, as our stand-in as the detective, while he may be a bit of a dunce on the outside, is the determined realist who isn't persuaded by the occult being the cause of the murders, even if it means he has to start doubting those around him. This attitude being shown alongside Jessica and George, whom end up discussing certain ways of how it could have been an outsider, as to not put doubt on those remaining.
However, George points out the specific wording of the letter from the night prior, which puts on emphasis of the entirety of the Ushiromiya family, meaning that the witch literally means to sacrifice the entire family, not just collect the gold that Kinzo borrowed from her, but takes the entire family that he made with said status. At this point, the group's attention turns to trying to solve the epitaph that is beneath her painting, being the only way to stopping the clock on these murders. Nazi shutting down the idea of there being any gold period at the location, all the while Battler puts forth a theory that the solution is to put pressure on the suddenly disappeared Kinzo, using the family as collateral to have her reveal the location of the gold. Eventually, however, it turns into a shouting match between Ava and Natsuhi, as Ava believes her to be the reason for Kinzo's sudden disappearance, with it happening shortly after she saw him earlier in the day, confirming there to be no other way out of his door but for which Natsuhi had the key to enter earlier. It further deteriorates into an attack on each other's personal character, Ava believing that Kinzo had actually been dead the past 6 years so that her and Kraus could have control over the family finances until this point. It ending when Natsuhi boldly points a gun at Ava after being claimed of pushing Kinzo out of a window in the morning. Things come to a boil, Natsuhi looks like she's about to shoot when Battler himself finally gets in the middle and takes over for a battle of wills with Ava himself in Natsuhi's place. Immediately putting to bed the theory of Natsuhi being the ones who have done any of the deeds presented, he instead makes a counter-argument that, due to how Kinzo's study is set up, he could have left from another room from within the study itself. While it bewilders Ava initially, he makes it clear this argument holds as much water as blaming Natsuhi for his death. And while it does rile up everyone else in the room to the degree that Jessica's asthma begins acting up and causing everyone to simmer down at last, it makes it plainly clear that the tension is getting to everyone involved and that the incessant fighting amongst everyone will not do them any favors. Ava admitting in the aftermath that it is better her and Natsuhi aren't in the same room going forward, as that kind of fighting will continue if they are both present. A rare sign of humility early on from Ava, one of which will become increasingly rare as we go on.
However, while I did say that Battler is our detective who was set out to prove that this wasn't done by Beatrice, nor done by anyone in his family, even he has his moments of wavering from time to time, as established in the following scene where he practically begs Maria in a moment of weakness that he wants to be proven that it is Beatrice, even telling Maria to make Beatrice make it possible for humans to solve to prove it to him. Battler may be determined, but in moments of crisis like what we just saw, even he can falter to his convictions. Something to keep in mind going forward for our protagonist.
The second night kicks in after this, as everyone has resigned themselves to the whims of the circumstances they find themselves in by now. On guard and still paranoid of each other to some degree, it's only when they call Ava and Hideyoshi, who are having a moment to themselves, to dinner, that things properly kick into gear again. As, unfortunate to all remaining, the two of them become the next sacrifices in Beatrice's game. Cannon finding their mangled corpses in their bedroom with the chain for their bedroom locked from the inside, making it distinct that whomever did this murder in particular couldn't have done it easily if they were a human. And while Maria is quick to taunt Battler, who blatantly asked for this not too long ago, while everyone else is trying their best to figure it out for themselves, it doesn't change the fact that the murders are continuing and, as a result of their lives, are very much still at risk, regardless of who is behind it, delivering a few punches to her skull for good measure for the appropriate timing.
Part of me feels like I should have a content warning for child abuse for Maria getting bonked. But considering the context of which it is happening in, especially compared to the other examples we're going to be getting into not so long after this, I feel like I can let this one slide a little bit.
While the siblings all continue to bicker, Cannon follows a stench down to the boiler room, following it to try and see if he can potentially snuff out whomever is responsible for the murders. Keeping in mind that whomever it is, Beatrice or someone else who killed Shannon, he places his bets, as he calls it, on taking out whomever responsible. However, despite his determination to declare that he's no longer furniture and to become more than his status as a servant, he pays dearly for it, becoming the 9th total sacrifice for the witch's game and, as a result, being found by the rest of the family not that long after. Or he would be the 9th, if Battler and Natsuhi didn't find another corpse when securing the rest of the island perimeter, a charred one with a stake in its forehead similar to the last 3 victims. Eventually coming to believe it to be Kinzo's missing body, meaning the total victim count has come up to 10 in total as of canon. And, as Maria puts it, the moment of Beatrice's revival is only becoming more a matter of time than anything else. The tension of the last few deaths has only made things worse. Jessica lashes out at Maria, who continues to console everyone about how Beatrice will make it better, considering her suspicious for the way she's been acting since it began. George, who's equally lost many of his loved ones by this point, attempts to try a more measured response to try and figure out some answers, but gets the same out of Maria in return. It all comes to a halt when Natsuhi finally takes the reins of the situation as the lone adult left, deciding that the best course of action is to lead them all to the one lone area which could hold them all safely, Kinzo's study, They decide to wait out the remainder of the evening in there to keep themselves safe and in check for the night. It's here in this moment when Natsuki finally asks a fury of her own. Beatrice actually being the mistress of Kinzo from years past. Genji corroborated this fury by stating that she passed away shortly before the mansion had been completed, proclaiming that his obsession with her is due to his desire to bring her back due to his undying love for her even so many years after her actual death.
This both gives us proper insight into Beatrice the person versus Beatrice the legendary witch, as up until this point, it had been considered that Beatrice was just this legendary folk story that the servants of Rokkenjima told to the children and would be passed down as a result. But now that we actually get some proper backstory about who the actual Beatrice is versus all of the legends surrounding her, this will become more and more uncovered as the story unfolds and, upon hindsight, makes the final reveal of who Beatrice is some episodes down the line a lot less of a surprise with all of this in mind. But it does in fact gives us a lot to ponder in the interim, as we still have a lot of ground to cover until that happens.
For now, however, upon all of this talk of Beatrice's life coming forward from those closest to Kinzo, the group finally pulled it together that the sacrifices were all there in the instruction manual all along, and they were outlined in Beatrice's epitaph from the very beginning, and that the entire gathering of the family was the only time possible where there could be enough sacrificed. The whims of fate allowing Beatrice's game to happen in the first place. And while there is continued talk of those dying as part of it being revived, Kinzo even potentially believing it to be his fate should he pass as part of it, everyone remaining is clear that this is nonsensical and that their deaths are just sacrifices to allow Beatrice's revival only to occur. Just as they figured this out, however, another letter that wasn't there before they had this revelation is subtly present. Tension's already once again at a boiling point. Natsuki finally loses it and points the gun at the remaining members of the family and the servants. Balor reading the letter once again addressed from Beatrice.
It's at this moment I want to point out the soundtrack to this series, in particular the one of the sound novels here, as while there are some very good tracks done in an array of different artists in Ryukishi's Rogues Gallery, not all of them made it to other parts of the story like the anime. One such example is the song that plays in this moment, System Zero, which uses a sample of a scene from Star Trek First Contact as part of it to establish the paranoia-inducing scenery that is occurring at this moment, as Natsuki completely loses her shit on everyone remaining.
Believing oneself to be perfect is often the sign of a delusional mind.
The chords and everything in between not helping the anxious vibes of it all.
After reading the letter, however, in which she declares that there will be no draw and either they figure out the epitaph or she kills them all for her revival, Natsuki declares that the only remaining servants or Maria could be responsible for it. To the point she snaps at Maria, who still declares that Beatrice is a real person. The ensuing chaos, with everyone pointing fingers at each other, mainly the remaining servants, ending with Natsuki almost pulling the trigger on Maria when pressed hard enough by her, only stopped by George telling her to keep a cool head on the matter. It all coming to a head when Genji, Nanjo, Kumasawa, and Maria all go to the same room separate from the remaining Ushiromiyas for the evening under the guise of suspicion from Natsuki, unwittingly putting the final gears in motion for Beatrice's final act of the game to happen, as a result, as they find a second page of the letter with another pentacle on it. When Balor figures out for his own research that the meaning of it is discord, the rest of them coming to the realization that yes, this is all part and parcel of Beatrice's plans to have them all cut between each other, and when they notice the phone begin to ring, which should be possible with the phone lines down, hearing Maria singing on the other end, they rush to the room where the others went to, only to find Nanjo, Kumasawa, and Genji's corpses mangled on the floor, Maria singing in the corner with blood on the walls, another moment played excellently regardless of which version you experience it in, the visuals mixed in with Yui Horie's haunting vocals soundtracking into the visual novel, and the anime versions, absolutely blood-curdling for this finale. Regardless, however, it's clear that the witch has claimed nights 6 through 8 of its epitaph, and the only ones remaining being the ones who found Maria, and Maria herself, who once again feigns ignorance on the whole thing, believing that Beatrice told her to do it on the promise of her revival once she is brought back to life. Not at all realizing that Natsuki left with another letter that was kept on the table for them to read once they came in, determined to find the killer or witch once and for all. In the sound novel and anime, it's left very vague if Beatrice actually does manifest in front of Natsuki, with the manga showing a silhouette of herself manifesting in front of her in a semi-physical form. However the way it's presented, however, the result remains the same. Natsuki fires with her rifle, the rest of the offspring break through only to find her dead with her shot right to the temple. The 9th night comes to a head with her death as a part of the epitaph. The clock strikes midnight on October the 6th, as Battler defiantly declares he doesn't believe in witches while Maria continues to declare Beatrice's total victory. We are given no such visual confirmation, only a written epilogue stating that the bodies of Battler, George, Jessica, and Maria were never properly found and was dead on Rokkenjima. And much like how, in similar fashion to Keiichi's plea from Onikakushi and Higurashi last year to find the truth for themselves, which was found after his death, several years later, a message in a bottle is found detailing the events of legend to a fisherman, addressed from Maria Ushiromiya, asking for whoever has found the letter to uncover the truth of the 2 days on Rokkenjima.
Now, normally this would be around the time that we do our post-episode wrap-up before heading into episode 2 of Umineko like we did with Higurashi. However, we're not done with Legend of the Golden Witch, as we still have a tea party to attend to.
I didn't mention this in Higurashi as I thought I should have, but throughout every arc in the sound novels, they'd have a little section known as the all-cast review session or thank you parties at the end of every episode, with the cast of Higurashi talking as actors like they have just wrapped their roles in the story. This also allows for the viewers to try and decompress a bit from the events of the arc they just sat through for both comedic and knowledge purposes, with Umineko continuing this trend as Battler, George, Jessica, Maria, Cannon, and Shannon all appear to do the same ritual for Legend of the Golden Witch, even down to Maria trying to solve the epitaph for the viewers using her notes. This is all until Battler asks a very important question. Who decided that it was all the work of a witch? To which everyone just stares blankly at him like he just ruined the vibe. This is where the other shoe drops for Umineko, as Battler's continued questioning of it being the work of a witch and trying to reason that it was in fact a human being being the culprit of it all, leads Beatrice to finally make herself an appearance as a character at last, to boldly declare that it couldn't have been anyone but her. However, Battler, determined in the end to prove that the witch wasn't the cause of it, and that magic doesn't exist, suffers as Beatrice causes everyone present at the tea party, except him, to die a gruesome death once again in front of his eyes after every attempt to make him submit to her fails. Incensed, Battler is now fueled by spite and anger to ensure that his family isn't used by playthings by the witch, determined to prove that whatever happened to Rokkenjima can be proven by those done by humans, deny her existence and free them from her grasp. Beatrice humors Battler, setting up another game of hers to try and make him submit to her belief that it could only be done by witches, in turn beginning the true story of Umineko. Not just that of the Ushiromiya family and their continued tragedy, but between the battle between magic and humans, which will become just as important for the next 7 episodes to come. And even then, we're still not done after this declaration of war between Battler and Beatrice, as we have a witches' tea party to attend to after the fact, with Beatrice talking to a very familiar looking and sounding witch, Berncastel, the Witch of Miracles. It's unknown as of legend if this is the same Berncastel we saw back in Higurashi, or if many things have changed since then, but to see a familiar face after so long does bring a smile to a returning reader of the franchise for sure. The two discussing how ruthless of a part of Beatrice can be, and that, as a result, it would be slaughter on 2 accounts if Battler isn't prepared. Luckily for him, Berncastel is seemingly aware of the predicament he's in, providing him a bit of her power and background on Beatrice, giving similar advice as to how she gave Rika back in Higurashi on figuring out the rules of the world and unraveling them. However, she makes it clear that while she is happy to aid Battler in his struggles against Beatrice, she is in no way an ally of his, declaring herself the cruelest witch in the world, seeing Battler as only a pawn to make her less bored after millennia of it. While we will not know the full extent of what she means by this until much later on, this comment does finally close Legend of the Golden Witch for us.
Now that we've finished running down Legend of the Golden Witch, having spent this much time on it alone, do you start to understand why I said about this being such an arduous journey that we're only covering the first 4 arcs in this part alone? Because while a lot of what we went through, like Higurashi, does get covered in similar fashion over time, make no mistake, a lot more information gets covered enough to make it just as dense for the rest of the run that we have left to go through. And when I say dense, I mean the manga volumes for Legend are the baseline for the rest of the series. And when it gets into the 3 or 4 or 5 part compendiums by the end, trust me when I say that I may have to start condensing a lot of information just to feel like I'm not being a recap machine here. But to put it in another way, if Higurashi was like an onion with the amount of layers that you consistently have to peel back one after the other to find the center of the mystery in order to find the truth, then Umineko is best described as a rich, dense cake. It's well crafted, had a lot of love put into it, but also times if you're not taking it slow and pacing yourself throughout the journey to get through it all, then you're going to have a very, very rough time trying to digest it fully and not enjoy the rich flavors of storytelling, the moist tearjerker moments that leave you in an emotional roller coaster, and very much will leave you feeling bloated by how much information you have to maintain in order to truly appreciate it. Wait, what was the point of this metaphor again?
What was the point of that little detour other than to try and satiate your piece's hunger there, reviewer?
Look, it's an essential part of the process of how we manage these topics. It engages the audience and allows us to properly process our feelings on it after the fact, as a fellow member of the audience myself. How are you expecting me to try and properly divest in what we're discussing if I'm not allowing these moments to breathe?
You do realize that you're simply wasting myself and the viewing gallery's time by allowing these little intermissions of yours to happen as often as you'd like? Especially given your little critique of this story of mine being long enough already, dear reviewer?
Hey, if you want me to dissect your story and discuss it properly, we require these moments as much as anything else in this journey. If you want to kneecap my ability to do this in an effective manner, we could simply end this game now, if you really have an issue with this.
Very well then, reviewer. If you so truly desire this to be the way it is, I shall allow your piece to have these little detours. However, you will reel in your piece as needed in order to ensure we are not kept here until the end of the Metaverse itself.
That was oddly easier than I had anticipated being. Am I wrong to assume you're a bit off your game with how easy it has been to change your mind on these subjects, dear Golden Witch? The text we're looking at paints you as this malevolent being who would make me beg for these changes on my hands and knees, and yet you're just letting me get away with it?
Just get to the next part already! You're trying my patience as it is. Besides, the next episode is where things truly get to be fun for yours truly, as you're about to see.
Very well then, Witch. Let us resume our journey.
In any case, with that deviation out of the way, let's get back into it with our next track of the story, which taunts us from the very entry point as being extreme before you even press start or begin to turn pages. The witch may want us to surrender instantly, but it will take more than that to deter us in the turn of the Golden Witch.
Turn of the Golden Witch starts not with us back at the mansion on Rokkenjima, but with us going to before the family gathering itself even begins, seeing the daily lives of 2 pairings of focus this time around, George and Shannon, and Cannon and Jessica, detailing 2 separate instances of the couples in particular having their relationships, which were explored in Legend, be more pronounced in their execution outside the island, and one such part of it and shows their dynamic within the confines of the Ushiromiya compound. showing that this isn't just a relationship which is only shown through their interactions on Rokkenjima, as it is being shown through them being able to have daily experiences as members of society outside the island as well. The moments between George and Shannon showing how much the two do truly love being around each other. The sweet and tender moments making you forget that just before we saw such brutal displays of murder and gruesome and gory moments of horror. Shannon's love enduring so deeply, however, for George in these moments that she goes through something dark in order to try and make it happen permanently. Going for a ritual of breaking a two-sided mirror representing her two sides of life and smashing it at an altar on Rokkenjima, declaring to the Witch of the Island Beatrice to make her human as part of their bargain. It's then after this instance, to start off this tale, that we once again see the little moments between each family conference, focus being placed heavily on George and Jessica and their families' interactions, which gives us more of a basis for their more uncomfortable moments that we saw in Legend of the Golden Witch. It expands a bit on what we heard Jessica say about how stifled she feels as the daughter of the first line of the family. Feeling as though she cannot be herself under the weight of expectations within the hierarchy. Feeling a similar way as Shannon, who feels like she is being judged constantly for how she has presented herself as a maid of the house, particularly around George. The two even share a conversation in the garden around their shared experiences before George enters, the three having a lovely conversation that shows us another moment of joy between the two lovebirds before Ava comes in and drops the bombshell of George having an arranged marriage set up. Ava going through this moment to taunt Shannon about her feelings towards George, seeing her as nothing more than a lowly servant, while also being on the receiving end of a verbal tongue-lashing by Natsuki for her performance as a servant so as demoralize her further on top of everything else. Kennen, however, coming in to support her in these moments following on from that, offering to help her through the current task as the two are so known to be tied together each other through their previously established history together. However, Shannon's lot in life, not just in these moments in particular, but in general, has made her feel desperate enough to try and beg for help from the legendary witch on the island and ask Beatrice to try and help her through this particular crisis. This summoning, for the first time in the story within the island of Rokkenjima, the Golden Witch herself, in front of one of the characters of the story without any vagueness involved. Beatrice appearing in front of Shannon and gives her an offer of her assistance. In exchange for her granting her chance to be in love with George, Shannon must break the mirror on Rokkenjima, cancelling out the witch's power. Initially refusing the offer from Beatrice, Shannon is berated by the witch that her refusal to do so will ensure that her current predicament will continue, stating hurtfully how much she doesn't deserve it, or George, until Cannon comes in to stop it. Beatrice leaving a brooch for Shannon as a reminder of this day. It then moves to a period after this in which Shannon does her end of the deal with Beatrice, breaking the mirror and owning up to her end, Beatrice meeting with her in the aftermath. Shannon sharing her gratitude for help and even giving Beatrice a sweet, as if to show that while Beatrice may be revered as this witch, she's just as much capable of human emotions as anyone else in this story. In fact, throughout all of this interaction between Shannon and Beatrice, it acts as a way for the viewer to see that there is more of a human element to Beatrice than legend had given her as this ghastly figure causing despair on the island residents during the hour of her resurrection, and that she can, if she wishes to, be a much more pleasant soul to be around to those who wish for her presence and help. Unfortunately, this moment is broken up, literally, by Cannon entering the preceding events, Beatrice leaving shortly after Cannon ends up arriving to the events at hand, much to Shannon's chagrin, the two having a quarrel over their status. Shannon states that she is in fact human after what she has done to free herself from being just a servant of the family, while Cannon continues to be adamant that they are furniture of the family only and that will never change despite any agreements with Beatrice. This is, however, where we see a phrase that will become both a continuous thread for the remainder of the story. Without love, it cannot be seen. It's given different variations throughout the story, one here being you cannot see it if you do not have love, but the core message of it changes throughout the story through different points. In this instance, Cannon's inability to properly see himself as anything aside from furniture is seen as a failing of him not being able to process love in his life the same way Shannon is able to. In this instance, being her love for George being what makes her want to be human, and broke free of the self-containing chains thanks to Beatrice.
We'll be revisiting the themes regarding that statement a lot, as it becomes more or less one of the core statements of the entire story by the end of this run. But for now, it marks an important distinction where the differences of canon and Shannon are at this juncture, and what their main story beat and conflict will be for this part.
And that is even before we have our attention turning to focus on Jessica and Canon, who was requested by Jessica by way of an idea from Shannon to act as her boyfriend, quote-unquote, at the school festival, getting her friends at her school to swoon over and show their jealousy over Canon being such a model boyfriend in public together, much to his internal displeasure, while Jessica cannot help but be unable to hide her happiness over it. This coming to a crescendo with Jessica dressing up as Marisa from Toho and, alongside a band she's made at the school, performing the song Surapetan in front of the school auditorium as well as Canon as well. Unfortunately, the song is cut out from the PS3 releases onwards for the sound novel as well as the anime version for obvious licensing reasons. Thankfully, the original PC sound novels and manga keep the Surapetan references in it, so with relation to those who want the most 100% experience of Umineko possible, this is where things will most likely start to affect your experience in the long term because changes like this become more and more prevalent in subsequent episodes going forward. Another thing that becomes something prevalent going forward is presenting Jessica's more free-spirited nature and continuing resentment of her life on Rokkenjima. Further showed off as following on from her return from the school festival, she tries to express her feelings towards Canon following the experience they had together outside the island. However, despite her full-hearted meaning behind her manner of speaking regarding it, it falls on deaf ears as Canon is fully set within his role as furniture and servant of the house, stating he's even forgotten his real name after all this time, and stating that he is incapable of loving Jessica the same way Shannon can for George. Crestfallen, Jessica leaves in tears, allowing Beatrice to make her entrance to Canon herself, the two engaging in a yelling contest in the garden, Beatrice taking great pleasure in seeing Canon's misery and showing her a more sadistic side as a witch to him in comparison to her more softer and humanistic nature with Shannon, brazenly talking down to him with the same negative talk she once gave Shannon not too long ago. We then finally reach the events of the family conference once again, starting us off with the familiar airport we saw near the beginning again, focusing primarily on Rosa and Maria's entrance to the rest of the family. Unfortunately being given another sign of the turmoil-filled relationship the two share as Rosa berates Maria as she's getting more complaints on the way to the gathering.
Once again, another example will come across in more condensed fashion at a later point. I am simply choosing to cover it in a more glossed over version now because there's only so many times I can say the phrase Rosa slaps Maria over something minuscule without feeling my PTSD begin to flare up as I say this to all of you. But trust me, we will be talking about this more in due time. For those who know what I mean, you know when it will be.
Regardless, following this scene in particular, Rosa does eventually console and make up with Maria, and we meet up with the rest of the family heading to the conference. Much like scenes that got repeated in Higurashi, such as Takano and Tomitake's introduction and Takano's history of the lore surrounding Hinamizawa, a lot of these scenes share similar moments, and repeating them will feel tiresome by the end of this retrospective. The main things to point out from this bit of the introduction is Jessica's little monologue about how she wonders if a long-lost member of the family will show up at this year's event, once again referencing a 19th person who could potentially be around or a relative of Kinzo's who's been forgotten. This is also where the comment of Shannon's pact with Beatrice is properly mentioned by Kumasawa to Jessica as having occurred, and that it may lead to some more sinister events happening on the island as a result, obviously giving more credence to what is to come. The Ushiromiyas arrive at the island, kids are overseeing them as they come to the courtyard and comments on their arrival, and then we're thrusted to an entirely different location, with Beatrice and Battler overseeing a chessboard in what will be known as the Meta World. The two discuss what is about to occur, Beatrice describing what is to come as endless torture for Battler, who states that the game is designed for Beatrice not to win, but that she feels she will do so anyway for said torture, stating that if there is no winner, it will be reset as many times as needed until one side bends the knee.
This establishes the guidelines of the story going forward as the reason for the repeats and talks of certain people being on the board as the story of Umineko continues to repeat as being the basis for the in-universe repeating instead of just one person being fated to try and unravel her own death like Higurashi did. With the meta-world being used as a separate area for Beatrice and Battler to both mull over the game being played as well as being used as a talking point for the audience to either have new rules of the world explained in detail or have further theories being mulled over. We'll come back to that last bit more and more, especially in this part, believe it or not. But this is where everything begins to start getting more interesting, as much as it becomes what I described before as being dense, and it will not slow up at any time until we reach that point of no return.
However, the two agree that it is torture for either side. Battler to force Beatrice to admit she isn't real, Beatrice to force Battler to admit her existence like the rest of the family did. The battle between the two properly begins. The usual fare happens from here. Maria has a moment in the garden and it isn't exactly great, but the minute everyone is out of the picture, Rosa once again scolds Maria harshly, leaving her on her own, Cannon especially taking umbrage with her treatment only for Maria to retort that Rosa will get what's coming to her. The usual discussion of Kinzo happens, and it's during this moment that Kyrie and Rosa talk about how Maria has grown, to which Rosa once again feels her familiar sense of regret over what she's done to Maria, realizes she's still outside as it begins to pour, and goes out to find her in a hurry. However, as she tries to hurry Maria back inside, Maria states that she isn't going with her, as she's waiting for Beatrice to arrive, and while one will assume that this is her simply going along with the legend of the witch, Beatrice herself properly manifests on the island as a living being in front of Rosa and Maria. And yes, this is indeed Witch Beatrice on full display, restoring Maria's candy that Rosa stepped on in anger to its former state, with Maria helping her along, stunning Rosa as well as the audience, who now have to question what on earth is actually happening here, as there's no question about it now, Beatrice is on the island. Handing Rosa the letter to deliver to the family dinner, she waltzes off into the main house and makes herself known to Kyrie, and later trying to see Kinzo for herself. Unable to do so due to a magic seal on his doorknob, going to her own quarters as Cannon serves her lunch. The two quickly bicker and resume their issues from earlier on, plainly stating her intentions to retrieve the earned gold and play her game once more with their lives as a result. Cannon being taunted as part of said ritual, Shannon may be offered up as a sacrifice due to her and George's love. Being forced to bend the knee to Beatrice to keep her safe from the witch's sickening game. Back in the Metaverse, however, Beatrice taunts herself being placed on the board, as it were, something that wasn't the case in Legend, with Meta Battler now having to work with a piece representing the witch in front of him on the field, now try and contest his claims, making it much harder than he was able to when Beatrice was a faceless being without any confirmed sightings. However, as Battler begins to try and find reason behind logically how this all happened, Beatrice stops him from doing so, declaring her turn is yet to be finished as we deviate back to the events on the board. Back on Rokkenjima, the adults begin to discuss Beatrice's arrival on the island, theorizing everything from her being the actual woman from the portrait to someone claiming to be from Kinzo's past to try and steal the inheritance from them. Arguing from them ensuing shortly after as Kyrie tries to consider who she truly is. However, Rosa presses Maria on who Beatrice is, Maria indicating to her mother that she lives on Rokkenjima. Rosa, as a result, suddenly having a flash of a seemingly repressed memory of hers of her time living on Rokkenjima. For now, we don't get much in terms of the details of what this is. Like many things, something we'll be returning to that as we press on, going forward. Cannon delivers Beatrice's message from the beginning of her game to Shannon, warning her to not accept George's proposal to spare her life as part of her sacrifices, breaking down as the weight of everything from his feelings for Jessica and not wanting to lose Shannon become too much to bear. Shannon going to Beatrice herself to declare her thanks for making her human, as if to taunt the legendary witch right to her face, calling her a bully and giving her a run for her money in terms of speaking back to her that she even gets a laugh out of Beatrice, declaring that she will kill her and George regardless of what happens next for her amusement. The rest of the day at the conference goes about the same as Legends did by this point, except with everyone instantly losing their minds over the realization that the guest that has entered is calling herself Beatrice. Infighting from before once again resumes over her true identity and her reasoning for being a part of the conference. All the while, the offspring continued the similar discussions in their residence, Nanjo being asked if he ever knew of someone like Beatrice from Kinzo's past, confirming he had heard of her but never met the woman herself. Battler instantly trying to figure out what he calls a devil's proof, something that cannot be confirmed or denied on the matter regarding Beatrice being who she claims to be. And, almost as if on cue, Maria instantly pipes up about his theories being bogus and that she's obviously the witch and it needs to be something impossible for a human to do to prove it to Battler.
Again, like I mentioned before, if you weren't a fan of Maria's antics in Legend, you probably won't be a fan of them much in turn. If anything, it becomes a bit more grating after you've had such an experience with them like last time.
Following this, George proposes to Shannon. Despite the warning from Canon and the threat from Beatrice, she accepts it like a legend. Canon immediately asking why and finally confronting his own feelings over Jessica at last, having fallen in love with her back at the school festival performance, declaring he would have fared better having not loved her at all, then falling in love with her and it not lasting. Juxtaposed with this moment in particular, the first day of the conference and Turn's first act ends with Kraus, Kyrie, Rudolph, Natsuki, Ava, and Hideyoshi meeting with Beatrice in the chapel on the residence, proclaiming that they all recognize her as Beatrice the Golden Witch as the clock strikes midnight on October 5th. The morning of the following day comes. Kenzo is shown alive in his quarters with Genji overlooking him. Genji summoning Rosa alongside Shannon and Nanjo to the chapel to find the door sealed with a familiar-looking pentagram and a message, "Happy Halloween" for Maria. Rosa hurries to the Offspring's quarters, finding the key to the chapel in the letter that Maria was given the previous day, opening it up to find what appears to be the six from earlier asleep at the table dressed up for Halloween, only to look upon further and find that their guts and organs are being used for decoration and spilled upon the floor. The rest of the family ends up finding the elaborate setup, the offspring within the story breaking down as expected, while Meta Battler reacts accordingly to seeing his family in pain once more. Beatrice taunting Battler's theories from the previous game, saying that she has adjusted the deaths accordingly to not reuse the same argument twice. Shortly after, back on the board, Battler and George find a letter in their room, finding the letter outlining her game once more similarly to Legend, them finding a few gold ignots next to it in order to prove to them the gold is in fact real. All the while, Maria does her act and is pleased by the events occurring, while those remaining despair. Jessica, on the other hand, with Canon's help, attempts to try and find Beatrice and give her what for, but she finds her gone, having seemingly fled the scene of the crime, leaving a taunting letter behind her, Jessica wailing in despair and saying she wants to kill her herself. Canon thankfully steps in to cool her down, only leaving her be once she has calmed down, being taunted about by Beatrice herself as she enters outside, trying to goad him further by saying that despite him coming to his feelings and keeping them from her for her safety, she'll still kill her regardless, sending him rushing back to the room to protect her from Beatrice's attack. This, however, is where things get a bit interesting, as Beatrice summons a swarm of goatmen in suits to attack Canon, and you think this is where he will suddenly be outnumbered and decimated without delay, but as Beatrice asks for him to do so, Canon summons a magical blade from his arm and begins to attack Beatrice's goats. What follows is a spectacular battle sequence as Canon makes short work of the goat summon to end his and Jessica's life. Jessica all the while if this is real or if this is all a delusion to her.
And at the same time, you, the audience member, are probably questioning yourself on what the hell is happening in the story by now compared to Higurashi, where this sort of thing was limited primarily only to details regarding the curse of Oyashiro being the closest thing the story had to something of a fantasy dynamic. But that's part of the point here. This is where the story becomes as much about the fantasy and metaworld politics as it becomes a story about this twisted family cursed to relive their deaths over and over because Beatrice is having too much fun torturing one set member of the family who won't accept her existence. In a way, one could argue that due to all of these events truly getting to kick into gear with the start of the mini-games that Beatrice and Battler will play against one another, this is where people could start to compare the journey that Battler experiences both in the meta world and the continuous cycles of Rokkenjima as being similar to the story of Dante's Divine Comedy. We'll begin to touch upon that sort of concept more and more as it goes along, as there's a lot to cover in regards to this. But the way that it begins to feel more twisted and distorted and hard to keep up with in terms of what is real and what is fictional if you're not keeping tabs on your own read-through of this, it can be easy to lose your head on what is going on until they suddenly interrupt it to break it down for you. But make no mistake, what is happening before you right now is just another part of the exaggerated game that Beatrice is playing with Battler, using his family as playthings. It may seem like it is really happening, but you have to remember going forward that until the truth has been outlined for us all, everything we see in front of us is just an illusion crafted by the witch to delude us.
Getting back to the point, however, following this dramatic battle to show Canon's true feelings for Jessica, in which Jessica claims that only a real human would come to do such an act of defiance, Beatrice summons one of the 7 stakes of purgatory, representing the 7 deadly sins in Asmodeus of Lust, to battle with Canon, piercing Jessica. Beatrice summoning Satan, representing wrath, to deliver the killing blow to Canon as he defies his status as furniture to the end against the Golden Witch. The sacrifice of the two lovers on the second night coming to pass in the form of Jessica and Canon, as Jessica tries to ask for his real name, Canon being unable to say it before they both pass on. But even their death isn't enough for Beatrice. Deciding to truly defile them for her own amusement, she disappears Canon's corpse away from Jessica as one last act of cruelty towards him. Even after his own death, he isn't allowed to be near the one he loves so much. Following on from this, we return to the remaining members of the family at the chapel, trying to examine the corpses of the adults who followed Beatrice there the night prior. Nanjo intent on examining their corpses as Battler and the others find a phrase on the chapel which Kinzo put into place to make it clear that it cannot be opened without proper intent. The phrase itself saying, "This door will not be opened without a miracle. You will not be blessed without a miracle." The intent of the message being a taunt from Beatrice regarding the specific kill. Nobody could have gotten in or out before or after the murder of the 6 adults happened. The chapel itself being sealed shut, as Rosa's letter had the key the entire time. This is where, upon swapping back to the meta world, we find meta battlers struggling over the sealed room scenario once again rearing its ugly head. This is where Beatrice introduces a new rule to the game that they are playing. Whenever the truth is said, red will highlight it. In the sound novel, this is conveyed literally through the text being displayed as red on the screen. In the anime, it's conveyed through the screen being turned red and the text showing up either in front or behind the person saying it, and in the manga, is simply bolded initially before being shown as proper red text in future episodes. You'll come to know why later on. In this moment of using it for Beatrice states the truth that regardless of those states of being all 6 that were dead entered the door to the chapel, there was only one key to the chapel and that it cannot be opened without that singular key or broken down on through other means of tampering. As Meta Battler tries to deduce it however possible, he keeps coming across roadblocks in the form of Beatrice's red truth, which he is taunted at by saying she is not obligated to provide any kind of proof to it to Battler, meaning that unless she shoots down any theory that is presented with red, it isn't the truth. This then leads Battler through pedantic levels of questioning that Battler deduces whomever the killer was took Maria's letter with the real key from her handbag, used it, and then resealed it back up into said handbag. While Beatrice initially feels pained by this explanation being unable to be swayed away in red, she still takes joy in knowing that despite this win, he still has to suspect his fellow family members in who could have taken it and used it. Returning back to Rokkenjima on the game board, October 5th continues on, everyone involved now questioning how the killer of the 6 adults managed to obtain the gold that they have in front of them as proof of its existence, believing whomever brought it out to taunt them has already found it at this point. While many theories are brought up as a result of it, from the obvious Maria saying it was in fact Beatrice, to Rosa claiming fault on Kinzo bringing it out to taunt them, they then shortly find Jessica without Canon by her side in her room from earlier, with the key for her room around her neck. Meta Battler immediately realizes that, once again, it's another locked room scenario, as he's told the only people that could have had access to a master key to her room would be the servants only, as they each have one master key for all the rooms of the mansion. Rosa immediately begins suspecting the servants, playing the role as the lone remaining adult that Nasi was in legend as the overly protective, if a bit paranoid, remaining adult on the island, as she declares that everyone who was remaining alive could have either been the killer or an accomplice. Much to Meta Battler's pain, as he states Jessica's killer is Canon. However, both battlers mount up a counterattack onto Beatrice, plainly asking her to repeat in red that Canon had a master key. When she doesn't respond in kind, he goes for the attack and declares that Jessica still has the master key for Canon, which is confirmed on the island for Nanjo, disproving the assumption that Canon is responsible. Much to Beatrice's approval for disapproving her notions through Rosa, she instantly goes on the attack in return by blocking off any hidden passages in her room, forever locking down the windows being locked from the outside and the servants only having the master keys on them. The logic battle between the two with Red continues on as Battler confirms Canon's death in that same room. No confirmation of he was still in the room or the door being locked with the master key by Beatrice, forever saying in red that unless someone opened the door by one of the keys mentioned, it's practically sealed. With no other options, Battler resigns from that battle to fight another day, the remaining members of the family letting cooler heads prevail for the moment. Maria, however, brings about the riddle of wolves and sheep, in which if carrying wolves and sheep across a ferry from one side to another, wolves cannot outnumber sheep lest they devour the sheep in question. Rosa, taking this as a sign, takes out the remaining servants from the room they're in, leaving only the members of the Ushiromiya family and her, Maria, Battler, and George, Rosa still believing them to be the co-conspirators of the killer. Her and Battler then once again go over the 2 murders that have happened so far, trying to figure out who could be amongst the servants who is the true wolf among them. The paranoia and anxiety sending everyone into a frenzy as George pleads for Shannon's innocence, but Rosa has gone full mama bear mode for all of them as the lone adult, brandishing the rifle once more.
This shows us again the complex dynamic of Rosa Ushiromiya as, while we've definitely seen her at her worst until this point with her treatment of Maria, and honestly being the most inactive of the entire siblings in all aspects aside from being the poor single mother, Turn paints Rosa once all the adults are dead as being this badass who is determined to protect the offspring. It's such a 180 in how she's been presented until this point for sure, but it does showcase that when she's not under duress, she could potentially be seen as a competent protector. Unfortunately for us and everyone on the island, this still is very much a moment of duress, and despite her badass one-liner of becoming a demon to protect them, she's still probably just as much a wreck as usual.
Immediately following this, the servants find Cannon's corpse in the storage closet of the kitchen. However, it mysteriously comes back to life, mentioning to us that Rosa was the one who was responsible for the murder of Jessica, riling up the servants in a similar manner. However, it's when his body ends up coming back up and he digs deep into the wound that he suffered from Wrath, that the other shoe drops in regards to what is actually going on with his body, Shannon finding a spider web and trying to bring it up to Cannon, declaring it to not be the servant he claims to be. And it's only after Nanjo and Kumasawa are sliced by Cannon in relation to this, Gerda pinning him to the wall with knives to stop him from doing any further damage, and Shannon pressing the spider web onto him, that his doppelganger dissipates into butterflies, an illusion for the servants to sow the seeds of discord by Beatrice once more. Rosa immediately points the blame at Cannon, believing him to still be alive despite it not being the case. The rest of the people alive going back to the servants' room to find the bodies of Nanjo and Kumasawa gone, their bloody trails only remaining. Once again, bodies removed from a sealed room, a letter taunting in its wake, and the master keys that belong to them being in the letter as well. Meta Battler has found himself at a seeming dead end as Beatrice confirms once again that it is in fact a third sealed room within the puzzle. After getting such a narrow definition of what is capable to be explained within this particular situation, including being called incompetent by Beatrice and Red to rub salt in the wound, Battler quickly realizes he's drowned out by Beatrice in the meta world and Rosa on the board. He gives up. Having been sufficiently worn down not just by the distrust of those around him, but by the very situation that he's been thrusted into, Battler cannot be helped but to say that Maria was right in it being not done by humans, not wanting to suspect anyone else in further. He even confides in Maria about this, arguably one of the first times in this late stage of the parts where the two seemingly come to a level of understanding, and a far cry for him whacking her over the head in Legend. Such moments will become important to remember when we reach later parts of the story, especially due to how the bond between Battler and Maria will in fact become one of the most important parts in the back half of Umineko in my eyes.
Immediately this shows us again that Battler both on the board and in the meta world, at this stage in the games anyway, isn't some heartless bastard willing to throw his family members under the bus like Beatrice is willing to do for those representing her point of view. Using the chess allegories that are rampant throughout this series and metaphors, and literally in how Beatrice and Battler's games are presented in their world, it's clear to see that Battler is wanting to save his pieces on the side of the board however possible, while Beatrice is playing an aggro strategy to bait him out and kill them off one by one at every point. And while Battler may be emotionally driven in his response to how he tackles Beatrice's attacks, it's only because he's learning how the game works in real time and having to go uphill constantly in order to find out what exactly works and what exactly doesn't. Turn probably showing us he has in fact probably been thrown into the deep end, and if he isn't careful, he will get drowned by the witch.
Moving on past this, the remaining servants surrender their keys to Rosa for safekeeping, putting them in Maria's bag again, and splitting the houses up between the remaining Ushiromiyas and the servants once more. Rosa even giving an apology for her paranoid behavior in a moment of clarity before George goes alongside Shannon. However, once it's only Rosa, Battler, and Maria left, Rosa once again fools apeshit and suspects that the keys that they were given weren't the only ones to the house. Meta Battler practically begging for Beatrice to show herself to Rosa to prove it to her. In an act of cruelty, Beatrice allows it to happen, but only if Battler debases himself for her and bows before her and admits her existence. Completely broken by Rosa's continued paranoia and mistrust, and Beatrice's harsh cruelty over the game being played. On the other side of things, George, Shannon, Gerda, and Genji all discuss the events of Cannon's doppelganger, and Shannon unleashing Beatrice's power by breaking the mirror at the shrine in the beginning of this part. Gerda stating that Natsu had a similar mirror that could act as a deterrent to Beatrice. However, the key to her room is still around her neck, which is still within the chapel, meaning if they want to get the key, they need to grab it from her corpse, all but Genji going to the chapel to obtain said key. Shannon finding it amongst her body, however before she can deliver it to Gerda and George, Beatrice's trap is set in motion as golden butterflies signaling her magic manifest in the chapel, all three managing to get out just as she manifests herself, getting to Natsu's room to unlock it. However, another of the stakes gets to Gerda before he can lock the door, killing him in the process. Beatrice and a horde of goats coming in after the fact, Beatrice finally looking to make good on her promise to kill Shannon and George in the end, Beatrice degrading her as George opens up the box too late. Only for Beatrice's attack to be blocked by Shannon. Much like her sibling in servitude in canon, she too has abilities that can fight against the magic of the Golden Witch, creating a barrier around her and George against her attacks, even as Beatrice summons back the canon duplicate to attack her barrier. Beatrice, however, becomes absolutely spurned by anger over Shannon's continued talk about how much she loves George and made an eternal promise to him, deciding to end it and unleash everything she has to crush them both for her sacrifices in an uncharacteristic act of malice. Genji then leads Rosa and the remaining offspring to find Nanjo and Kumasawa's bodies in the garden. Then Battler finds the bodies of Gerda, Shannon, and George having been gouged by the stakes as well, knowing by now that means that even before midnight, Beatrice has most of her sacrifices. Battler, defeated, finds one last letter from Beatrice on the table taunting the remaining members of the family. Rosa immediately suspecting him, declaring that he isn't the real Battler Ushiromiya, a theory of which will become much more important and interesting to consider in future installments, but this is the moment that finally breaks him from his lull state. Lashing out at Rosa for how she's treated everyone since the beginning, citing that she has just as much culpability as anyone else at this point, including himself. Maria getting in the middle of them to try and stop their shouting match, only further making Battler beg for the witch to come out and show herself to prove it once and for all. And she eventually does. Genji guiding Battler to Kinzo's room before midnight to see the witch herself. Beatrice going down the route of explaining to Battler, but not to the audience, the explanations of how everything of the sacrifices happened, and what her reasoning was behind doing it all, forcing him to admit that witches were real. The king toppled, the opponent resigned, only thing left to do is to reflect on poor moves made, re-rack, and try again next time. Except, that's not the ending, once again. As while Battler went to accept his fate, Rosa and Maria in tow with her went searching for the witch, carrying with her the 3 gold bars found in the chapel. Meanwhile, in the dining hall, Beatrice's celebration feast takes place, Battler being paraded about naked and only having a chain around him. It would be really hot if it wasn't absolutely depressing to see him like this. Kinzo was sacrificed by a parade of goats as his final reward, screaming in ecstasy as he's devoured whole by them. Battle is sharing a similar fate as he finally snaps out of it in time to realize what has happened to himself. Back with Rosa and Maria, they try to escape from a horde of the goats, Rosa going mama bear mode once again to protect Maria and the gold she's carrying from her being taken away from her, blasting them away and even getting Maria to reload the rifle for her, which is both cute and kinda messed up that she knows how to do such a thing. all of this being backed up by a song from the soundtrack known as World End Dominator, one of the key bits of the entire soundtrack of Umineko to this point. When many people think about iconic soundtracks from the series, there's a few select songs that appear in each part that only appear either in one select part or get used throughout it. We most likely heard it before with Dread of the Grave being one of them, which acts as Battler's objection theme and more or less his own personal battle theme in a sense whenever he goes to absolutely slaughter Beatrice. Unfortunately, in these early parts, it's used, especially within Turn of the Golden Witch, to minimal effect and doesn't really last as long as you would hope. However, it is the fact that it gets used so much and even has certain remixes appear throughout the entire Umineko story for certain other characters and certain other specific moments make it a massive song to go back to. The same can be said as with this once-off, World End Dominator, which is basically Rosa's battle theme in a sense as she escapes the island with Maria and has become one of the bigger standout pieces of not just Turn of the Golden Witch, but the entire question arcs in period. However, she can only run on for so long before something catches up to her to be able to hinder her, spraining her ankle on a fall down some stairs to the boat off the island, telling Maria to go on ahead to save her, Maria not leaving her side, despite everything loving her and refusing to leave her mum. The two share a heartfelt moment, which in this entire opening half of the series is one of the few shining moments of their entire relationship. But Maria says that about how, despite their flaws, they do still love each other all the same as mother and daughter, giving Rosa the encouragement she needs to get back up and fight. And while it does look hopeful for Rosa, unfortunately her ultimate fate in turn is for the worse, as she's found not that long after strapped into a chair at the dining table, Beatrice serving her a meal based upon the one she hated the most in life. Wine from Krause's blood, a pie baked into Rudolph's face, a salad with garnishes of Ava's tongues on top, and finally, the main course. The head of Maria Ushiromiya who taunts her as she's made to eat every single one of them by goats. The scene in any version you experience it in being garish, ghouly, and utterly repulsive to experience. But special mention goes to how twisted the manga makes the visuals. In particular, every moment of Rosa having to be seen as being forced to devour every bit of the meal presented to her, and especially Maria's head being puppeteered by Beatrice is so fucking disgusting. I love it so fucking much though. It is, however, when we get this incredible moment to follow it up, as Beatrice declares for Rosa to be force-fed more ghastly meals when...
うまそうだな。俺にはてめえの牛乳をスライスしてサンドイッチを作ってくれ。
その声はバトラー。
Battler returns onto the scene, complete with some snarky one-liners towards Beatrice and even a little comment to Maria about saying for someone to gobble her up, declaring that he isn't done yet with facing off against Beatrice. He may have faltered, but he isn't out yet. Beatrice, however, is ecstatic that her game is looking to continue. Not pleased by how easily it took to crush his spirit this time around, even parading this fact to Burgestel after the fact when asking for his satisfaction on how she proceeded, when a new voyeur is added to the witch's gallery. A familiar-looking blonde-haired girl in a pink Halloween-themed dress, the witch's certainty and former opponent of Burgestel, Lambda Delta, enters the proceeding, having been drafted by Beatrice to be her right hand going forward given that Byrne is aiding Battler. Burgestel addressing Battler after this revelation through the audience by invoking the words of someone familiar, an old piece of hers, by telling us to fight on in the manner of Rika. The sound novel, especially with voice acting, taking it a step further by having Yukari Tamura slowly go from her Burgestel voice back to her Rika voice. Unfortunately, this is a moment that is stripped out entirely in the anime and changed slightly in the manga to eliminate said reference to Rika, only having Burgestel go mew like a cat instead. In fact, this entire exchange and the one that follows with Lambda Delta addressing Battler to taunt him, while also admitting that Beatrice could have made Battler go into checkmate against her in that game, was either too naive or outright didn't wish to do so against him so soon, was cut out of the anime. Which not only leaves some crucial bits of characterization for both witches in particular, but also shows us from our end that something is happening on Beatrice's end as, if she were able to end it so quickly, there has to be a reason why, despite her want to make Battler submit so easily, she's continuing the game as it is. Regardless, this is the note that Turn of the Golden Witch properly ends on, with Battle knowing now just what to expect from Beatrice in the games to come, and knowing that there is more going on than it seems with the addition of Lambda Delta to her ranks, meaning that things are about to get more wicked going forward.
And really, Turn is very much what it says on the tin. It was a game designed to bring those with only a surface-level understanding of what's going on down to their knees, and to make them plead for answers. If Battle is a representation of the audience the same way Keiichi was in Higurashi, then let's just say this was a thinly veiled attack on those who found the puzzles in Legend too challenging for their liking, and Ryukishi was telling them to wise up and get their shit together for the puzzles to come, even giving a similar taunt in his writer's letter at the end of Turn's manga. One could argue this is very much similar to how Watanagashi Hen had laid out a lot of the puzzle pieces of the mastermind in front of us, and gives us a fair bit of work in general about what is to come along the way. Some would argue in return that you still need the pieces of Banquet and Alliance to properly be able to solve it. I'm one in the camp of this being where you could start to piece it together in turn, but it's also plainly obvious in certain actions who the culprits and the identity of Beatrice truly is, starting from now. It just becomes much more obvious in the future installments how glaring this was at this point in time.
My dear reviewer, you're really giving the audience too many clues here in regards to the story. At this rate, you may as well just tell them the ending with how much you're giving away.
With the greatest respect, it's why we said this is not to replace your story, but to be used as a companion to it, which... If you truly think this to ruin your beloved games, I could just easily stop talking about it in detail like this. But then again, that would ruin the fun of what we are doing here, right?
You humans. So unable to handle even the simplest of concepts if it isn't spelt out for you. Truly, you're ruining their already poor media literacy by having to spoon-feed them these little hints. Have you no shame? At this rate, I'd expect you to simply tell them who I truly am by the end of this night. Why even try and get them to figure it out for themselves, if they have you to read it and find out for their own?
I'm only giving them my own insight here. Nothing more, nothing less. They can choose to explore this and make their own thoughts and opinions on their own. If it's making it easier for them, then most commentary of our nature would be doing so, and there'd be no reason for people like me to be here, and for us to properly do what we're doing tonight.
Just get on to Banquet already. You're becoming a pain with your incessant talking. At least your vessel has a better way of speaking about my story than you do.
You sure you're doing alright there, Golden Witch? You're not exactly feeling like your old shipper troll self here.
Just continue already!
So I guess with that being said, you probably expect us to rush right back into the fray and discuss Banquet of the Golden Witch, right? Well, you're wrong. Because, as is tradition by this point, we have to take a bit of an intermission or a tea break in this sense, to talk about a piece of side content before we dive right back into it. And of course, it all comes back around to those goddamn stage plays, as we finally get to talk about Shingadan's best work with 7th expansion, in Stage of the Golden Witch, the Umineko musicals. So, much like previous series that we had covered on this channel in the past, Umineko has been made into stage adaptations with musical aspects in it as well. Similar to previously made productions for Hinamizawa Bus Stop and Ujina's 2 stage productions, these cover the events of the singular arcs in each subsequent musical. In this case, as of writing, they've managed to get to complete the 4 question arcs and, once this video goes out, they will have finished the run of episode 6. Considering the fact that these started being released on a seasonal cycle since March 2022, it's insane to think the level of dedication being presented to the people behind it, of which were the same people responsible for the production of Bus Stop, and were also responsible for making Rose Gun Day's stage shows. Shingadan.
The kicker as well, these shows have some hella high production values to them, some of which I'd argue put the likes of RGU's stage performances in 2017 and 2019 to shame, with musical numbers spread throughout that blend so well with the music in from the sound novels and the actors involved both respecting the source material with their performance, while also breathing new life into the roles as well. Not to mention, they got the original Golden Witch actress herself and Sayaka Ohara to voice her in the first episode. While she does get taken over physically by Hikaru Inada in subsequent performances of episode 1's Tea Party onwards. That being said, the fact they managed to get her back for this kind of thing, and on top of that have Ryukishi's backing creatively as part of the project when he's been working on other stuff, unfortunately none of it being Sakurnia, but hey. And this honestly would be the part of the video section interlude where I'd start to rattle off all the things that were probably bad about this and try to offset the glowing positivity I have to say regarding all of this. Well, I hate to have to tell you this, but I don't really have that much in terms of negatives to really say regarding it, to be honest. Like most stage adaptations, there's a lot of room to fill in regards to the roles previously performed by those both from the anime and sound novels, later adaptations from the PS3 onwards. But honestly, while they aren't replacing the performances of them anytime soon, and this is no way going to replace experiencing Umineko in the ways we've already discussed in doing so, as an alternative viewpoint and an already differing experience entirely, I'm so glad that we have this in the same way that we have RGU's various musicals or Bust-Off's theatrical adaptation. In no way is this ever going to be the preferred experience, aside from maybe those who grew up on Star Kid musicals perhaps. But I honestly adore what is given to the fandom at large because where else can you see someone act like a large ham as Battler, Beatrice, and especially Bird Castell in later chapters in anything other than anime conventions? None. None, I dare say.
And for that, honestly, I'd say if you enjoy a good stage show or musical, Stage of the Golden Witch is absolutely up your alley, and I'd recommend it in a heartbeat. Plus, it helped us from getting English subtitle releases for a while. And those, I would argue, make it so much easier to access than others of its kind, and it's a godsend and a testament alone to the dedication of this fanbase some nearly 2 decades on from its debut. And it makes for a perfect way of being able to have a neat little gap between the first half and the second half of the question arcs, and, as a result, makes this next bit a little bit easier to break up and discuss. So without any further distraction, let's get to episode 3 of Umineko, and attend the Banquet of the Golden Witch. Okay, I tell a lie. We're not actually starting on Banquet, because we have a little bit of housekeeping to do on what was supposed to come out instead of Banquet. Land of the Golden Witch.
Really? Land of the Golden Witch? Are you actually trying to annoy me at this point? What point does this serve narratively to everything?
Land of the Golden Witch is something to bring up for many differing reasons. It also gets referenced by yourself in later games of this, if you recall. So unless you've forgotten its importance to both Ryukishi as the writer of these games, or yourself as the one who was to oversee them, I suggest that you allow my vessel to continue on and explain its importance to our gracious viewers.
See, Land of the Golden Witch was the original 3rd episode of Umineko, originally penned to be a much harder experience compared to that of Legend in turn before it, with Ryukishi going on in interviews to say since that it would have ramped up the difficulty levels of the puzzles involved within the overall mystery. However, when Ryukishi was given feedback on the mysteries in the first 2 episodes from fans after its release, as well as people who had a prototype version of Land of the Golden Witch during its development process, it was found that Land's challenges in one go were too much too soon for all involved. That, plus ramping up the difficulty being found to be too much to bear for all who had tested out the prototype, which resulted in Ryukishi cancelling production of a completed Land of the Golden Witch and creating Banquet as a much more simpler follow-up to Turn of the Golden Witch instead. This was even down to the difficulty of Banquet being made to an even level in its description when you read over the blurb before you boot it up, as a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, yes, you should be able to solve this one by now. That being said, the aspects of what was going to be put into land of the Golden Witch didn't go to waste, as aspects of the elements of land would still be incorporated within Banquet itself to a degree, as well as other elements within the collective would be spread out throughout subsequent episodes of Umineko to follow. To what end of those aspects being specifically ones that were lifted from land and later welded into episodes respectively is unknown, as nothing has ever been confirmed to have been a concept from land or not. Even Ryukishi has kept a pretty tight lid on that particular cat box to this day. But considering what aspects we still have yet to come versus what has been before us, it's safe to say that a lot more of the vicious aspects to come in later entries could very well have been aspects Ryukishi lifted from land and fitted for later in Umineko's story. I bring this up in particular as well because this change in the story so early on is one of the first signs of Ryukishi modifying the story of Umineko based upon fan feedback and, in some cases, backlash regarding aspects that were introduced either in prototypes or full-release versions of the story that will become a running theme throughout the rest of this journey. As this unfortunately will not be the last time that we will have to bring up Ryukishi deciding to change aspects due to fan demand or real-life issues impacting his writing choices in the end. It will both be an interesting point in this story as it goes on, as much as it will be a point of contention going forward that some would label a curse upon Umineko's cycle. But we're not even close to discussing how it will impact future episodes. Let's focus on what we have now in front of us and discuss what did get released in the end. Banquet of the Golden Witch.
Banquet properly starts out with showing us more of Beatrice's past life. Whether this is the past life of Witch Beatrice or a glimpse into the life of the actual being calling herself Beatrice in the lives of the Ushiromiya family remains to be seen. But it shows us her life as a child underneath the care of a woman who also calls herself Beatrice. Here, it is shown through similar magic that Beatrice gave to Maria in turn to restore her candy, that the elder shows it off with her to fix a vase she broke on accident, not wanting to upset her grandfather. The elder Beatrice showing how that, even if she restored it, the vase's fate doesn't change. It will still break as a cat jumps over it instead to cause the breakage. This is also where we begin to see something that will be of the utmost importance in the future to be mindful of, as Elder Beatrice mentions about how magic used to maim and kill is the easiest to master, but reviving and mending is more powerful as it requires experience from the user to master over time. This will be important for the immediacy of what we are about to experience with Banquet's twists and turns, but also very much for what we can expect to see going forward with certain archetypes of characters both yet to come, and how some fall to their innermost darkness as a result of events in future installments. Regardless, we see how Beatrice began her journey into becoming a witch she is now, as it shows her finding the elder Beatrice as an inspiration for her as a child to study witchcraft, in turn leading her to the path she is on now, awaking in her chambers in current day, mulling over her past experiences with her before she's interrupted by the stakes of sin. The stakes, having been killing and reviving Battler after the last game they played together to keep them all busy, are seen here as not being all that dissimilar to children with Beatrice as their mother, while also showing off Beatrice's power as while she can maim and kill so easily, she can restore human life like Battler like it was nothing. Battler is still stuck in this purgatory state with Beatrice until he admits total surrender, states he's prepared to face her again following his inability to do so in turn, still going over the theories he had from that game with her and every wrong answer and letting him a stab for one of the stakes as penance, which each one he provides becoming more and more absurd. It'll come as no surprise to you, but this entire section after the flashback doesn't exist in the anime, which is a shame given it shows us to provide some more grounding work for Beatrice going forward, as well as give the stakes some funny moments here and there in Purgatorio. The two then agree that it's time for a new game to finally begin between the two, leading us to the same island scenario we've come to find, but Ava seems a lot more on edge than usual from previous times we've seen traveled here, leading us to get some more background on her as a result. The ensuing flashback, which shows that Ava and Kraus have always had a feud dating back to when they were younger, stems from Kraus being the natural firstborn of the family and, as a result, his misogynistic attitude clashing with her high achiever status within the family as the firstborn woman. Of course, this is also when we get some more insight into Kinzo as a father to all his offspring, as he slaps Kraus immediately for his haughtier attitude, and then immediately barks at Ava the same patriarchal talking points that Kraus is giving to her about her only purpose being to marry someone beneficial and continue the family line. This begins to show us as the viewer that, make no mistake, The Ushiromiya family is absolutely fucked up to its core, and generational trauma runs rampant within it, be it a sign of the times in which it was set in or otherwise, and that the continued toxicity is being passed down either consciously or subconsciously to their own offspring to continue the trend. And it's this part in particular that starts to make you realize that if you truly are not paying attention and giving yourself time to properly digest it, you will absolutely miss important and crucial details in this story. Because believe it or not, this will become one of the more important aspects alongside the mantra established in turn of, without love, it cannot be seen. But, like most things, we will let you know more about it in time. For now, we see a younger Ava dismaying over her lot in life, seeing a younger version of herself state that she alone would be the one to inherit the Ushiromiya name instead of Kraus, stating by bending herself to Kinzo's whim, she's forgotten her true ambitions from when she was younger about wanting to strive for more than just what a patriarchal society wishes for her. Hell, adult Ava even admits she's passing on her failed ambitions and trauma as a result on the George, but the younger Ava stating that it isn't too late for them to strive for their goals, just as they reach the island to begin our story proper. There's some nice moments between her and Hideyoshi as they reach the island and dismount, Ava confiding her worst fears of George and her life in general to him, and once more showing how they may be one of the more healthier dynamics within this story. More on that in a bit. We get the nice moments of the offspring at the beach, including some cute moments with Maria and Battler again, as well as the admission of Battler coming to rescue Shannon riding on a white horse, as something she was promised from him 6 years ago. Something to keep in your back pocket for Shannon and Battler's dynamic in the future. And we once again have some nice talking points about how each of their love lives as a result, Jessica and George included with Cannon and Shannon, all 5 of the young ones sharing a cute extended moment together, before it's swiftly broken apart by Beatrice declaring it's time for misery and woe once more. Even Battler commenting on it being a bit extra this time around. Yep, once again we skip right to the meat of it all as you get right to Maria meeting Beatrice in the garden trying to find her rose, it having been scattered away by the typhoon's wind, much to Maria's distraughtness. However, deciding to showcase a similar act of what was done for her in the past and restore it using her magic. Maria giving the same kind of response that Beatrice did to her elder when she was younger, as if to mirror her as Beatrice's innocence represented, is given the letter for her game to begin, being given Kinzo's head ring and introducing us to another of Beatrice's gallery and her butler, Ronov. Ronov introduces himself to Battler, much to his frustration of more of these magical beings showing up, which doesn't help with Ronov's particular brand of greeting himself to Battler in a teasing manner almost immediately. But his appearance also doubles as proof of Beatrice's power coming back more and more as these games continue. Said game continuing on as Maria reads Beatrice's letter given to her as normal, bickering amongst the family ensuring as a result. This time, however, Ava takes center stage amongst all the adults following Cross with Natsuhi and Rose's focus in the last 2 parts. And as they continue to bicker amongst themselves while their offsprings are sent away, they do admit themselves that despite what they may say to all of them, the ones who lived on Rokkenjima know that there may in fact have been a Beatrice who lived on this island with them once upon a time. Once again, going off the mysterious lover theory from last time, we get more insight about how Kinzo built up the Ushiromiya's fortune in his youth, having made deals for arms traders back then to rebuild the family fortune, and buying Rokkenjima Island not that long after as a result. While most of the details are kept vague for now, it does confirm something for the readers that Kinzo's fortune was indeed done through scrupulous means, and that, as a result, he may have potentially made the island as a stronghold to hide his potential secret lover from the world, that being Beatrice. And they deduce that the letter of intent is a challenge from this mistress from Kinzo's past to solve it before she does, or, regardless of their line of succession, it will fall to whoever solves it first. The Beatrice in the letter is outlining that it will be her first and foremost. The adults all scamper in fear for their succession being snuffed out from under them. Ava takes it upon herself as the rest of them bicker amongst themselves to solve the riddle, and finally obtain her long sought after desire of becoming head of the family through finding the gold. Throughout all of this is where Battler begins to piece together the 19th person theory that allows him to finally put the blame on someone other than his family, finally putting it together from theories surrounding the legend of Beatrice as well as the supposed mistress theory that was floating around. He discusses the theory with Ronov, showing that the two have a more natural and less combative dynamic compared to him and Beatrice, even using the devil's proof argument from Turn to flip it around as though the 19th person could have been there all along, but hiding out of sight. However, Beatrice returns just as he comes to this revelation, and turns it around once more to herself using the Raven paradox, mentioned as Hempel's Raven in this case, wherein she utilizes it to claim that in order to prove the 19th person is real, Battler has to provide an alibi for every other of the 18 to do so, which is troublesome given that the 18 are the only ones who can do so. But it's only when Battler catches Beatrice using red for arguments flippantly does he finally strike. Having been caught off guard due to not knowing how to combat it last time, he immediately goads her into using the red to state that there are only 18 humans on the island, her refusing to say it for that and stating how many more are on the island, period. It's only when we return to the island itself that the other shoe begins to drop, as Rosa admits to what was hinted at back in turn, stating that she killed Beatrice and saying that she should be dead. It's here where we get a flashback from Rosa's POV from her time on the island, sneaking out after being scolded into the forest, and eventually finding herself at the cottage we saw at the beginning of Banquet during Beatrice's dream, named the Kuwadorian. She finds the actual Beatrice of the painting living at that side of the mansion of the island. This is where we properly begin to learn more and more lore about Beatrice, the person on the island, after legend in turn gave us slivers of it in passing, and only really alluding to certain theories on who this might be, with Beatrice stating through showing the Kuwadorian as it being her trapped under Kinzo's control for her homunculus in 1967, several years before any of the events to come happened. However, Battler ends up mocking Beatrice's explanation and, in a huff, leaves without finishing it. Whether or not this is a ploy or is showing Beatrice's true nature underneath her more harsher exterior remains to truly be seen, but it does give more layers to the dynamic she shares with Battler when she actually disappears in a huff. Battler, however, begins to try and decipher the theory from what is presented, believing that Beatrice was someone who Kinzo loved but committed suicide at one point due to her feeling stifled by Kinzo, in return birthing a daughter who was her spitting image who was kept in the Kuwadorian and met Rosa at one point in time. It shows the Beatrice of the Kuwadorian as being much more dainty of a figure than the one we know now, more wide-eyed and excitable when speaking with Rosa, but upon realizing that she is but a bird in a cage made by Kinzo, admits her tired nature of being this way, Rosa taking pity on her and helping her leave the Kuwadorian to explore at the outside of it. Unfortunately, while it does go well to start, Rosa leads her to the cliffside near the docks, which Beatrice slips on and leading to her demise as a result. Meta Beatrice only laughs as Battler comes to realize that the 19th person theory of Beatrice being on the island in the Kuwadorian cannot be if she was dead long before the events on the island ever occurred. This is when she pulls out the rug from Battler, finally using the red to admit there are no more than 18 humans on Rokkenjima. Just as quickly as Battler got the upper hand, he swiftly cut back down in order to be hurt once more. Not only that, but amongst everything, Kinzo is chosen to be the first sacrifice of the ritual, leading to Genji summoning Kanon and Shannon to his quarters in secrecy, only to find Kinzo's charred corpse and Beatrice standing over him, and the trap having been sprung to eliminate all of Kinzo's servants alongside him on the first night. While Genji is willing to lay down his life for Beatrice as she circumvents Kinzo's lordship upon his death, Kanon and Shannon have other plans and defy the order, facing the witch alongside her 7 stakes of purgatory, summoning Lucifer of Pride as her first one against Kanon. Beatrice once again using the battle between Lucifer and Kanon to taunt Battler over the existence of magic, while Kanon battles for his life and is want to keep living alongside Jessica, despite his complicated feelings still at this juncture in the story. The duel between the two ending with Kanon getting the upper hand, taking advantage of Lucifer's namesake and catching her before she can deal the death blow onto Kanon, ending her in the process before revealing he now has to face all the other 6 at once. The outnumbering only stopping once Shannon takes advantage of the stakes bickering with Lucifer to come to Kanon's aid, pulling up her barrier to defend him from the onslaught. Shannon once again angering Beatrice with her continued mention about how good of a life she has lived before Genji gives them a more dignified end before he is snuffed out as well. Ronarv chastising Beatrice for her continued outbursts. It's then when you expect Kumasawa to be taken out, only for her to block the attack like it was nothing, allowing us to finally be revealed to Kumasawa's true identity in the world of witches, as the former Beatrice the Elder that trained our current witch. Having grown dissatisfied with her student's performance as Endless Witch, she aims to take back her title as such, much to Beatrice's rebellious response on the matter, the two engaging in a magical battle to decide who keeps the title of Endless Witch through, admittedly, very exaggerated magic battles and then some. This of course includes floating towers of Gatling guns, giant shields, particle blasts, the works essentially all ending with the Elder spiking Beatrice with a giant sword in the ground. But as the Elder looks to take back her title and revert Beatrice back to human, she's spiked by the Golden Witch, having been killed earlier and then revived all so she could be killed again. Battler, of course, has no way to try and counteract the points made against him on this, Beatrice lapping up his literal sweat and tears out of anguish, causing him to lash back finally and tell her to kick rocks in an angrily fashion as he's warped away by the elder Beatrice, properly naming herself Virgilia. The two meet, with Virgilia deciding to give Battler counsel against Beatrice after faltering to her on the game board, still existing within the confines of the meta world just fine, immediately heading back after his pep talk to simply declare a "no you didn't" the entire magic battle on Rokkenjima, citing Schrodinger's cat as his basis for the argument before jumping back in. The following day comes on Rokkenjima and the rest of the family find the servants dead in different parts of the house, marked with the same magic circle as before on every first night. Jessica and George react accordingly and the adults give each other rifles for protection. Meanwhile, back in the meta world, Battler gets to work immediately on tackling each sealed room separately, confirming however as he goes along that each room they were killed in creates a loop within each other between the rooms the servants were found in and Kinzo's room. Battler is stunned, but not overwhelmed. Battler begins to break down the argument to simply by them all being killed in a trap each room, now turning the tables on Beatrice by pulling her same trick about not elaborating, being only undone in that by Beatrice using red truth to state his theory is false. This is when Battler comes to the realization that Beatrice is just as much trapped in this situation as he is. He's finally broken the facade underneath. The two are truly equals in a way. Remember this for much later on down the line. Battler then begins to twist things in his direction, backing Beatrice into quarter after quarter as he manages to force her to try and weasel her way out with red, being forced to stop by Rono before she messes up too much by being rash against Battler's reversal of events, the two hiding away to re-strategize. Beatrice returns shortly after to reside on the first night's puzzle, much to her pouting dismay on the matter as Battler finally gets some level of leverage up on the Golden Witch at last, after so much pain and anguish to this point. There's a little fun moment, exclusive to the manga and sound novels, which shows Beatrice pouting isn't an act, but actually how she's feeling as she gets upset over what has happened. Virgilia and Rono having to lead her through her feelings like a high school rom-com almost, except with having to kick his ass instead. The only thing Beatrice is left with by Virgilia is a simple reminder that her win condition is to make Battler accept her existence, leaving her to ponder on that as we return back to the island again, with the adults trying to solve the epitaph and pin down the location of the gold. They do go through a whole laundry list of theories to try and decipher the meaning behind each part of the epitaph from a human perspective, the first time they properly do so in all these parts until this point, but still unable to properly figure it out as a group. But it's only when Ava's younger self gives her a hint that leads her to a book and a study within a mansion, leading to her finding the final part to realizing what the key is to the gold, eventually leading her down into an underground corridor and a large metal door with a phrase of the 10th Twilight epitaph scrawled over it. And it's here, when Ava enters the room herself, that she sees that the Ushiromiya fortune does in fact exist. The gold is in fact real, and she has managed to be the first of her family to solve it and gain it for herself. Ava breaks down crying over this realization that her struggles have not all been in vain, only for Rosa to immediately come in on the aftermath and find her, tragically only being beaten by a few minutes after giving Ava the hint she needed on the epitaph to find it herself. As the two point rifles at each other, they both come to an understanding that they were both mistreated by Kraus growing up. Coming to an understanding on this, they put aside the weapons and concoct a plan to keep it from their siblings. However, Rosa immediately turns the tables on Ava, declaring she needs to announce her victory by the end of the family conference, otherwise she will extort more of the arranged split from her in order to keep her secrecy in mind. The first time we properly see Rosa stand up and be a bit sneaky for her own self-interest like her other family members. It's only in this moment that the younger Ava, upon declaring that the gold belongs to her alone, is declared upon as such by Beatrice manifesting in front of her to be the successor of the Ushiromiya family, sending the younger Ava to her own succession ceremony, wherein she doesn't just become the family head, but also the successor to the title of the Endless Witch. Thusly, we are now introduced to a new Beatrice into the mix, Ava Beatrice, or Avatrice for short, even being given a spiffy outfit and a new portrait to replace Beatrice's current one in its place, much like how Beatrice replaced it in turn when she landed upon the island herself. As a result of succeeding Beatrice, she is given the 7 stakes and is introduced to the rest of the coven of witches and other beings we've come to know in the meta world as a result. Even Battler, despite his grievances and what the hell happened, can't help but congratulate his Aunt Ava for finally getting a win after so much bullshit going on in her life. When Ava properly returns to the mansion with Rosa, she comes down severely with a fever, Hideyoshi falling on to take care of her in another moment, which shows off their dynamic once again. Right before Maria and Rosa break it up with a prerequisite moment of Rosa being a garbage mum. However, it's when the two go out to see Maria's rose in the garden, and we suddenly see someone that looks like Ava come out, do we know that nothing good is going to happen. Ava just comes out, as Ava, writhing in agony inside the mansion with her fever continued acting up, declares Rosa and Maria to be the second night sacrifices of the two who are closest together, a deviation from those of a romantic sense like Ava and Hideyoshi in legend, and Jessica and canon in turn. Of course, this comes from an obvious place of malice in how the selection was done this time, shown plainly in the way that Avatrice almost takes too much fun in smashing apart Rosa and Maria in sadistic fashion, such as setting them up high, smashing them down to the ground, and then reviving them again, only to follow it up by drowning the both of them in a big gelatin dish while Maria is burnt alive in an oven, then transforming Rosa into a butterfly and letting her get eaten by a spider, all the while she talks about how stupid she is and how much fun she's having as a result. Even Beatrice herself is laughing despite Battler's protesting on the matter, telling her to knock it off while she continues to laugh it up and say this is her doing, but continuing to taunt all the while. Battler finally has enough and slaps Beatrice, walking off while declaring how much of a horrid being she truly is despite all of the good moments they've shared in this part alone. Genuinely upset with her for the first time properly in this part, to the point he disappears from the meta world. His reaction even getting the other members of the meta world to scold Beatrice in return, her demanding they leave as well as they admonish her for her behavior. Something which isn't new in this part, mind you, but has become more on the forefront now given the circumstances. Beatrice having to step in to tell her to stop it and just to produce the sacrifices, even as Maria tries to convince her to stop Avatrice from doing so, only sadly commenting she isn't the Golden Witch any longer, giving Maria a swift and painless end to ease both of their suffering on the matter, as Rosa is spiked on the railing in the garden. The remaining humans find their bodies in the garden, bringing them inside and trying to figure out who managed to do such a thing as per usual, Ava knowing the truth and trying to convince her more unruly half to settle down and come back within her to stop this. However, Avatrice cannot be stopped any longer, declaring she'll kill the remaining siblings so Ava will get all the gold, as Ava continues to writhe in pain. Back in the meta world, Battler has returned to the table and Beatrice's behavior is cooled down to a moderate level. Battler still continues to give Beatrice everything but the silent treatment in his responses, still very much bitter over how she's been acting in this game until now, and for good reason. Battler's been forced to see his family members for 2 games in a row be strung up and put into situations all to make him specifically suffer, all in the name of trying to make it seem impossible for any human to do it. But he's become fed up of continuously seeing them be used as her playthings, saying that there's no meaning aside from cruelty in how she's doing this. To the point he states his disappointment and refuses to acknowledge her as his opponent, asking for Ronov to do it in her stead. Beatrice sadly removing herself from her own game as a result, while the others remain simply thank Battler for not leaving the game entirely. Beatrice goes to talk with Avatrice on the board. She attempts to try and give some guidance to Avatrice on the matters of how the killings are meant to be to try and wear down the wills of the island into accepting the witch more and more over time. Avatrice, however, knows this, but is choosing to be more cunning and malicious about her kills. Beatrice returns to solitude, however more pleased when she hears of Battler's mood increasing, even after hearing Ronov had to resign from the second night's mystery due to Battler outdoing him in the process. Beatrice showing that she still cares more about Battler than she lets on than just being her plaything. Back on the board, Hideyoshi, Rudolph, and Kyrie leave the guest rooms to go back to the mansion to gather food for the evening, falling right into the trap of Avatris, who seeks Leviathan of Envy, and Belphegor of Sloth onto Rudolph and Kyrie, leaving Hideyoshi on order from Rudolph. What follows is a duel between the four, with Rudolph and Kyrie showing how well they work together as a duo, proving their more badass nature as protectors of the family as much as they are each other by pulling out their rifles onto the stakes, Rudolph even getting a shot onto Belphegor. However, during Kyrie's fight with Leviathan, we learn more about her background from Rudolph, declaring she was his first lover and his first wife Azumu Ushiromiya got in the way, even being envious of her down to the fact that the same day Battler was born, her child went into stillbirth. Regardless, Rudolph and Kyrie narrowly escape until they come face to face with Avatris, the two of them pointing their rifles to her and making it clear from Rudolph's perspective that they need to retreat now and retreat fast, as Avatris cannot block bullets. It's here where we're then introduced to a new trio of furniture underneath Beatrice's guard, Shiester 410 and Shiester 45, the members of Pendragon's Memorial Troops. And yes, they're cyborg buddy girls. Let's just accept it as a Ryukishi oddity and move on with our lives. The Shiesters operate on a literal programming system to target and take down Rudolph and Kyrie with golden guided laser arrows, gouging them both to death as Avatris laughs it up, ready to revive them again and do it all over again until Beto comes in to admonish her once again. However, Avatris basically calls the old woman out for her double standards, realizing she's kind of been responsible for making the issues she's created for herself in the first place, and that while she may be the more sadistic and evil nature of Ava taken form as the witch Beatrice, it's not as though this wasn't a precedent set up previously by Beto and her actions in turn. It's then Beto properly realizes how cruel she's been to Battler until this point, Virgilia having to tell her that she was disgusted with her from the minute the games between the two started because of said cruelty from her, rewording it less as an act of torture between the two, but a trial to see which is right. Beto is left to ponder on this, while back on the board, Avatris is confronted by Hideyoshi on what has happened, believing that his wife has gone mad due to finding so much gold in the hidden room, giving her a good slap while she goes on about how much fun she had reviving and killing everyone again. And when he further tries to assault her physically to try and snap her out of it, he gets shot and sacrificed alongside Kyrie and Rudolph for his troubles. Reluctantly, mind you, as Ava wakes up to find that they are all dead. Her, Battler, and George all weeping for them as Meta Battler looks on with disgust at it all still. Renault finally relenting to try and ease Beto back into the game as his opponent. He still doesn't accept her as such, but the two share a moment of understanding once again where Battler does indeed say he won't give in until Beto is on the other side as his opponent.
You may have noticed by this point that, compared to their dynamic in turn, it seems as though these two do potentially have some type of companionship going on as the games continue. That they may be able to come more to an understanding than the more they focus on it just being less about the games and more about understanding each other in general. This, I feel, is intentional for two reasons. One immediate and one that won't become apparent until later on. The immediate one is to establish that, for the moment, Beto is in fact the antagonist, and she's not exactly a villain for Battler as much as legend in turn made her out to be. That she may be very well someone that he can come to understand over time. And while this maybe has some questionable aspects for the moment, it is something to keep in mind for the rest of this part of the story, as it will be relevant in later parts to come, and very much be something we will have to look at when discussing Beto and Battler's dynamic in the long term by the end.
For now, however, we return back to the board and the remaining members of the family despairing over the loss of those who have been killed to this point. George especially is despairing over losing Shannon, even saying he's willing to believe in witches and magic if it meant bringing her back, to which Beto enters once more. Following along with Beto to accept her offer to revive Shannon, Ava despairs on what has happened alone while Avatris taunts her repeatedly that it was her fault because she created Avatris in the first place, attempting to try and keep her mind off of things by serving the rest of the adults coffee, to which Krause and Natsuhi talk about the feud between each of them and Ava. However, as I discussed our mutual feelings of regret towards Eva, and hope to properly make up for it someday while Eva is out, Avatrice strikes and kills them both with the Shiesters, Ava returning to find them already gone while Avatrice notices something is up, realizing that Beto is meddling with George to revive Shannon. As this happens, Beto probably remembers the true strength of revival magic through the deep bond and want of love that George has to bring to Shannon back to life. Remembering her initial time of learning it as a child with Virgilia, Beto finally at last remembers why she became a witch and, by extension, finally uses said magic to revive Shannon with George's love for her as the conduit. It takes all the life force out of her to do so, but it gains the respect of Virgilia at the end of it all, Beto seemingly pleased at knowing that the strongest love that cannot be beat is love after all. A much more tender look regarding her scenes with Shannon in previous entries. However, it's cut short, as Avatrice gets the Shiesters to aim and fire, killing both George and the newly revived Shannon as a result, to Beto's horror. Avatrice aiming to kill her as well, Virgilia getting in the way to block her and allow Beto to escape before she's hit as well, with it being unclear if Beto did in fact get away as we do go back to the rest of the humans. Said humans find Kraus and Natsuki dead, Jessica fuming at what has happened to this point while Battler and Ava go to the mansion to try and find George, only to find a door with the number 07151129, the room containing George inside of it to Ava's horror and the continued anguish of everyone still alive. However, Jessica finally snaps, believing Ava to be the one who could have killed them, and the bickering continue on until suddenly out of nowhere, Ava fires the rifle she had on her. While it doesn't kill Jessica, it does manage to blind her as a result, her now truly believing Ava meant to kill her. But, as she gets bandaged up by the eyes in order for them to heal, Nadra leaves the infirmary for a minute and instantly falls prey to Avatrice once more, another sacrifice made for the rituals in sadistic fashion, taunting Jessica in the immediate aftermath that she is next. Beto once again gets involved, however, doing the same thing she did for George to Jessica, reviving Cannon as her final way to proving the battler that she deserves to sit on the other side of the table as his opponent once more, reviving his soul only to guide Jessica through to her survival. And with sneaking help from Ronov's concealing magic and a lovely little bit of character building for their relationship once more, they manage to find an area to conceal Jessica, Beatrice attempting to steal it up in order for Cannon, to his reluctance initially, to have one final moment with Jessica. Unfortunately, this one act of kindness is Beto's downfall on the game board, as Beto is shot down by the Shiesters while Avatrice, her only asking Beto why she changed so much, before she decides to properly kill her off. Beto telling her off as being so new to the role of Endless Witch and the lessons she's relearned throughout all of this. However, despite the attempts of the Shiesters to kill her, Beto survives each attempt, stating that this is the true power of the Endless Witch, before bursting into flames and revitalizing herself truly over her title and rank of Endless Witch Beatrice. Ronov even returns to her side alongside it, before she ends up fully disappearing in this moment. As she properly begins to disappear, she calls back out to Meta Battler to ask if he considers her a worthy opponent at last. Battler only responds that she isn't her opponent, dragging Avatrice into the meta world and declaring her to be his opponent now. When Avatrice attempts to try and kill Meta Battler, it's here where we find that the Shiesters are unable to do so, as his anti-magic field level is up to Endless 9! Forcing Avatrice to finally take the seat filled by Beto, her instead sitting by Battler as him and Avatrice duke it out over the already existed events. From here, Battler tears to shreds every night against Avatrice, painting Eva as the killer who took out Rudolph and Kyrie, Hideyoshi taking the bullet for her as the reason why he died, and then strangling both Kraus and Kyrie when the two were alone together. All the while, Avatrice struggles in vain to try and bluster through rules to try and come across theories that would have Battler be able to submit, even foolishly using Reddit times where it doesn't benefit her, proving her novice stature in comparison to Battler, who's become an expert at this. However, it's once she finally gets the hang of it that she turns it around on Battler, redoing the previous attempts and making it so Kyrie didn't want to go get food in the mansion until Avatrice puppeteered her with magic to convince her to do it and fall for the trap. Beto then steps in the minute Battler is cornered again, Beto coming to his aid alongside Virgilia to be able to help him out of the bind, believing this to be her chance to gain his favor after he fought for her honor after so long. And, while Beto does seem like she hasn't been able to find anything, Battler finds one piece that cuts a hole in Avatrice's fury. cigarettes on her person, and Rudolph being a smoker. But deducing it wasn't his smokes but Hideyoshi's, with a hint from earlier at the beginning of Eva hating cigarettes, but the butt being in her room, he deduces Hideyoshi smoked in it while creating her alibi for the murders. Battler clutches in for the kill with Hempel's Raven on Hideyoshi being present for when they found Eva, a move in which Evatrice is unable to counter and is once again forced into resignation. Despite this, Evatrice comes back on the offensive for the following nights, promising a move that is inescapable, as she paints Battler as being able to account for Eva's alibi from Jessica's injury, confirming all of the dead is actually dead and the alive is alive, and that Nadjo could have been killed by Eva or Battler, and that Jessica couldn't have killed him, or it be suicide or a trap. Eva has Battler in a spiderweb of a trap, unable to find a move to be able to wriggle his way out from, as visually made clear in both the anime and manga and is alluded to as bestly as possible in the sound novels. Even Virgilia is shocked to admit that it was really done in a way that was perfect in its execution. Realizing that it's effectively a checkmate situation for Battler on the human side, Beto performs the ultimate sacrifice, using the red truth to deny the witch's argument entirely, knowing it means her utter destruction by doing so, forcing Battler to cover his ears to not hear the truth being said so he doesn't know it. As Beto performs the ultimate sacrifice, she looks back one more time and smiles at Battler, anguishedly crying out for her to stop. The world of the witch is fading away and returning to the game board, to find Battler in front of Ava, announcing he knows her to be the killer. And, as the clock gets closer to striking midnight on the 5th of October one more time, Eva points her rifle to Battler's chest, mocking him for taking so long to figure it out, and shooting him with a mocking laugh, sending him to the floor as one of the dead. His soul, however, finds him in a void where he meets Beto one more time, questioning if what she did was worthy of being called the Golden Witch, of which Battler admits that she was indeed that, and that finally manages to get her to regain her form at last. It's then where the witch's procession on the Golden Land opening up is finally seen, with the dead of the Ushiromiya being seen happily alongside the witches and the other beings we've come to know by now becoming present. The mood of it feels elated, in fact, some would argue a bit too good to be true, as you see the likes of Ava and Natsuki getting along and everyone being happy over the servant royalty pairings of Jessica and Cannon and George and Shannon, instead of how they'd probably actually be, which is more than likely terrified and angered. In fact, it's only when the reveal of a contract requiring the signatures of all present to acknowledge its opening is presented, and Battler reads the fine print that states that by signing, he acknowledges Beatrice as a witch, that the trick is finally revealed. Yes, the entire exchange up until this point was all in an attempt to get Battler to acknowledge witches existing, Virgilia even being on it the entire time as she gets to try and get him to sign it. Once again being another masterfully shown moment in any part of the series, but major shoutouts go to the manga, which shows the twisted and distorted faces of Beto and Virgilia, getting him to sign the contract themselves. And just when you think he's actually going to go off and sign it and seal his doom, a red-headed girl suddenly appears breaking into the party, the witches attempting to get the furniture presented to try and take her out, as she evades and takes them all out instead, calling Battler a soft-hearted fool for believing they could change. And when Battler asks Beto plainly if this is the truth, while she does admittedly her delayer responds and verbally seem as though she doesn't want this, she still responds regardless that yes, this was all a trick to get him to sign it and force his hand into believing in her, even down to her change of heart. The redhead, however, despite all of the attacks thrown her way to try and stop her, eventually ends up getting to protect Battler, despite all of the harsh comments she throws at him about what he has done until this point, being revealed as a pawn summoned by Bergcastel to aid Battler against Beatrice. However, as she's added to the gallery of the human argument, we aren't given much information on who she is properly aside from a few comments and a slap from her about how she got to be with all the other cousins and family members, hinting at her being related to Battler in some way. Before we are given any answers on that front, however, we get another tea party with Beatrice, Bergcastel, and Lambda Delta. While it's very solid fare for a good point, it isn't until Bergcastel leaves and Beatrice and Lambda are left alone that Lambda drops her mask, telling her outright to stop fooling around and calling her out on the fact that she should have won by now, but doesn't seem to properly care about it, revealing that she doesn't care about Beatrice's wants and needs in this matter, and that she's only a tool to trap Burkestel in a metaphorical cage with the games eternally, being obsessed with her to keep her in that state. Not only that, but she threatens that if she doesn't start getting her shit together in the next game, that she'll trap Beatrice in a fragment to make her relive her most miserable days before she was a witch for eternity, showing her to be just as malicious and sadistic as the other witches to this point. It's then, following on from all of this, that we turn to the past the massacre time frame to October 1998. 12 years on, we see the red-headed youth who saved Battler from certain doom. Arriving to a hospital, we see a gravely ill Eva Ushiromiya, who refers to the redhead as Ange, the sister of Battler who didn't attend the conference that fated weekend 12 years prior. Ava's gotten just as paranoid Kinzo was in his dying days, believing Ange to be set on killing her on her deathbed, much to Ange's non-reaction. Having been in her care since Ava's return from the conference in which she was the only survivor of, the media having gone into a frenzy in the days and years to follow on what the true nature of the event was. In return, Ava became the same as Kinzo was in her treatment of Ange, only continuing the cycle of familial trauma that has caused much misery for those who attended the family conference 12 years prior. Ava giving Ange the Ushiromiya head ring, believing its curse would pass on to her as a result. However, Ange simply wants to know only one thing: what truly happened in the period of October 1986. Eva refusing to tell her anything as one final act of petty revenge before passing away shortly after. Ange, distraught over the lack of answers and continued anguish as the final head and the final endless wish given to her by Eva, content on killing herself to escape her fate, is instead given an offer by Burgestel which throws herself into the affair of Battler and Beatrice's game. In return for your services, I will find you a fragment in which your family returns to you alive. This offer entices Ange, accepting as a way to garner vengeance against those who took her family from her, granting the title of Beatrice the Golden Witch like Ava before her. She takes a plunge down from the rooftop, and in one of the most iconic moments of the entire story, moonsaults her way down with Burkestel to save Battler, and be able to aid him in his fight against Beatrice, ending Banquet of the Golden Witch on a hopeful note.
And really, it's one of the more hopeful notes any of these stories will come to end on, in all honesty, as Ange coming in on the defense of Battler, saving him from certain doom, and then showing us who she is and why she's here, served to bring us some sense of hope after the crushing revelation at the end of Banquet. But that's arguably one of the bigger reasons why Banquet of the Golden Witch is deemed by many as a favorite, despite its troubled origins and what it became what it is now, because arguably if it weren't for this story being as cruel of its twisting of the knife at the end after building up Beto and Battler's dynamic the entire time, the rug pull wouldn't have been as effective. And even then, the lore being fleshed out so much more on the side of magic, as well as establishing Beatrice and Endless Witch as a title, not just the name of the witch Beto proclaims herself to be, made theories back in the day much more juicier to try and sift through, that going through the wild mass guessing page on TV tropes for this became a fun pastime for those who were invested in it back in the day. Regardless, with all the cards on the table, the players entering the final stage of the question arcs, and with the final pieces of the puzzle being added in, there's no further stalling for time. Let's dive into the finale of our evening's events.
Oh, now you decide to not stall for time on this, huh? Give me a break already. You've already wasted so much of our time on meaningless side quests.
It's truly a shame when our talents are wasted. But here I was thinking I was challenged by Beatrice. Being up front here, it really does feel like I'm walking through someone who doesn't get her own story, or someone who has apparently forgotten who she is.
Ugh. Never mind then. The final game for tonight is set in motion, and I do believe it is one that you will struggle and squirm with the most. After all, it contains some very interesting parts in it that you specifically do not enjoy in Ryukishi's media, don't you?
Wait, no!
Nuh-uh-uh! Your vessel has already begun to speak. It's too late to stop her now.
time to show the alliance of the Golden Witch.
But before we get to moving on in terms of the game of witches and humans, we must first ask the question of what kind of life did Ushiromiya lead leading up to her proposal by Banquet? After all, compared to the rest of the family by now, she's only been hinted at as the member who was meant to come with Battler's side, but was ill. Ava even mentioning her health several times in Banquet, which would be appropriate to her given to her being the one to take care of her. Admittedly unfortunate given what would become of their dynamic in the years to follow. And this in turn leads us into the future of Ange's timeline, sending us to 1998 again as we look at Ange's life, having been sent to a very familiar sounding school, St. Lucia Academy, the same boarding school Shio and Tsunezaki was sent to one time ago, giving us some more insight as to how the school operates than what we saw in Higurashi. The boarding school is seen as a very preppy kind of situation to be in, one that makes Ange greatly uncomfortable as she's iced out and bullied constantly, despite her attempts at trying to be peaceful and unbothered, even despite their outright petty levels of bullying that would put most Disney Channel shows to shame. However, they quickly realize that she's capable of putting up a fight against them if she wants to, as shown when she establishes her more violent nature being restrained against some bullies trying to snatch her hair ties, which are the last gift Battler gave her before his passing, scaring them away temporarily before they come back and gang up on her shortly after. Despite the bullying building up her suicidal tendencies, she finds an escape in the pages of a book, in which she summons the life force of Maria Ushiromiya through it, the book itself being a journal that Maria kept that was found in her belongings following the massacre. It's here we learn about what kind of relationship Maria and Ange had, showing that in the lead up to 1986, Maria often told Ange a lot of her experiences with Beatrice and magic. Ange quickly growing out of it compared to Maria as she grew older, however, but the showing of it is still cute regardless. This ultimately ties into a theory regarding Maria and one other member of the Ushiromiya family offspring that we'll cover at the end of this part, as I feel this connection between Maria and Ange isn't by accident, but by design. But we'll get to it when we get to it. Regardless, the journal tells a lot more experiences from Maria's point of view, giving us in tandem a flashback period to before the 1986 massacre, and putting the focus more on Maria in this episode compared to the other offspring in previous episodes to this point alongside Ange in 1998. In this beginning flashback, we see more of Maria and Rosa's home life, showing a birthday in which Rosa gives Maria a lion plushie which is named Sakutaro, handmade by Rosa as they both celebrate together in what is seen as a light breeze compared to their interactions in the past. The Sakutaro plush even talks to Ange even though it's alive in this section, even following along Maria for trips to a convenience store to get dinner when Rosa's away working, despite her protest that she's too old for that from Rosa. This also partially is where we learn of Maria's expertise in magic being more than just for creepy magic circles and celebrating the sacrifices of the epitaph that we've grown accustomed to in the last few parts. That Maria does in fact have a lot of experience with the lighter side of magic, if you will. As she talks to Ange about learning about magic means acknowledging those that have been there all along, as well as the ability to summon said spirits and guardians' energies when necessary as parts of her focus in on becoming the witch she is today. This being hinted at as far back as Turn, where she commented that magic requires risk to be effective, showing us that she knows more than she lets on and is seen as a foreshadow to what we see as Ange looks to her as a teacher in magic going forward. However, while we get information about what has happened to her before her offer, we also get insight on what is actually happening in real time as well post Ava's death in 1998.
For clarity's sake, I'll try to ensure I make the timeline as clear-cut as possible when we're in specific parts of 1998, as Alliance jumps around through the main period of 1986, pre-1986 conference with Maria, 1998 before Ava's death, and 1998 post-Ava's death. So if it feels a little bit disorienting, it's only because it is at certain points.
To establish this, in 1998 post-Ava, we see Ange meeting up with someone who was a business partner with Ava in the past, Okanogi, no relation to the one from Higurashi, who's taken over as president of the Ushiromiya family company in the wake of Ava's death. Rokkenjima speaks with Edge about Eva once more while giving her the succession ring as part of her will, detailing us more to the kinds of abuse she suffered at the hands of Eva in her time growing up underneath the 12 years prior. However, he also slowly but surely makes it clear that despite her awful actions, despite all the scrutiny and despite everything in between that was deemed as awful in the last few years, Rokkenjima believes that she did it all not out of malice, but out of grief and in turn caused by the love that she had for her family and her want for Edge to be successful where hers couldn't. Once again, another example of showing a variation of without love it cannot be seen in the way that it presents Eva's actions, and that because Edge doesn't see it as a love from her, she cannot see the truth in her actions. We'll come to revisit that in particular, as well as the continued focus on the line being integral to the core of every mystery as such, as it is the every element of the story of Umineko as a whole. Much later on in this part. We haven't even truly begun to get into the trenches of Alliance, mind you. The next bit then focuses on with Kyrie's sister and her gang of goons that we saw pursuing her back at the end of Banquet's secret tea party, coming to try and take her out to steal the inheritance fortune left by Eva, and making him run from it with help from Rokkenjima, despite being told to keep her distracted. Kasumi, the sister of Kyrie, then gets on a hot pursuit of Edge that will last for the remainder of Alliance within the post-Eva death of 1998, providing some much-needed action within the back half as her and her men continue to hunt down Edge and secure the money from the Ushiromiya group inheritance. Edge having assistance from her bodyguard and Juza Amakusa to help make up a break for it fully, having been a soldier in the JSDF and French Foreign Legion who went AWOL on both in the past. He's quite the proverbial powerhouse. Edge, however, in this part of the story, is dead set on finding out the truth of the 1986 murders for herself, having to find closure however she can on the matters as Eva took her truth to the grave. Spoiler alert for the rest of the series, this becomes Edge's running thread throughout the entirety of 1998, and we will be coming back to this continuously. But when she comes to the revelation that Rokkenjima never sold her out and actually did intend to have a getaway car set up for her, she realizes he was speaking the truth in the recurring phrase of not finding it without love, finding out for herself that she needs to be able to trust in those around her. Confiding in Amakusa, she begins digging through the messages in the bottle that have arisen since the massacre. 2 bottles of which detailing 2 different versions of events entirely, from what Edge states of Eva being listed in the victims, and not as the only survivor, we can deduce that these were legend and turn stories respectively. This further complicates matters to show that the stories of each game aren't just a showdown between Battler and Beatrice in a metaphorical sense, but they are also in fact stories that have been made up by either those claiming to be members of the Ushiromiya family as alluded to in the text, or thought of to be by former Ushiromiya handservants. Alongside that, it confirms whoever stated themselves to be Maria in Legend's bottle of events has their handwriting confirmed to not be the case, and that the 2 letters were written by someone else entirely each time. These forgeries being written to further muddy the waters of the truth without properly revealing who this Beatrice properly is in Edge's timeline. Comparing Rokkenjima and its events of 1986 to that of a cat box, the first of many times that the analogy will be used in this story, Edge becomes determined to find the truth of the cat box and find out everything for herself. During this time, Edge looks back on Maria's journal to a meeting with Beatrice, seemingly at the Kumadorian where she meets Sakataro and teaches Maria an ability to bring him to life in a familiar proper with the help of Vigilia as well, granting him a humanoid form in the process. In this process, Maria becomes a full-blown witch of her own, being granted the title of Witch of Origins from both Beatrice and Virgilia, the three creating the Mariage Sorcerer, or Witches Alliance, as a show of unity between all of their powers, especially Maria, who is granted through keeping a pure heart as a witch. All of this is to show that Maria's knowledge of witchery and her relationship with Beatrice wasn't consistently only just about the darker side and depressing bits we find on the main parts of the story to this point, but to establish Maria as being powerful in her own right, as we've talked about previously. Edge being visited by Maria in the present of 1998 to be reminded that, despite being no longer a part of the Alliance like she is, her power as a witch has never left. Sakataro and Maria both being reminders of current 1998 Edge, of an event that happened prior. It's then that we flash back to the events of past 1998 Edge, still training in her ways of being a witch alongside Maria in her journal, finding solace in the lessons she shares with this Maria, even being able to summon the 7 Sisters of Purgatory as part of this. This ends up being a nice little reprieve as it shows the sisters smothering Sakataro and being transferred the summoning magic from Maria to Edge to help establish her power more, only being able to summon one of them at a time initially, that being Mammon of Greed, who will be her closest companion of the seven sisters. With Mammon alongside her to be able to build up her magic over time, Edge's overall mood and confidence begins to grow as a result of her magic ability going up, despite the events of her time at St. Lucia continuing to be a miserable experience, but it lessened by Mammon, Maria and Sakataro's continued influence, even confiding in Mammon her wish to bring her family back, being told by Maria that no matter how much she trains, she won't ever be able to bring the ability to revive someone back without a vessel to do so. Something important to keep in mind for later. However, Ange isn't deterred, determined to become the Witch of Resurrection before her life is over, and be able to properly become worthy of such a title, even gaining the admiration of Maria to do so. The current Ange looking on at her past self with some level of melancholy, knowing what she knows now. Bern Castell summoning her for her game to begin, leading us to return to the Metaworld proper, Beatrice awakening and preparing to make Battler submit once more, while Battler has been curled up in the fetal position in the intervening time of the previous game to now. Beatrice even being told of how painful, merciless, and cruel it was of her by Ronarv, asking for her to appeal to his emotions during what is most likely a time of crisis for him. This being a prank by Ronarv to further show Beatrice's emotions once more as we enter our final act of the question arcs of Umineko. Ange entering in after these antics occur, bringing with her a more stoic attitude compared to all involved, who have by this point in time become more friendlier and less antagonistic throughout these games' continuation, especially giving her ire towards Battler, who she feels should be taking it more seriously by this point. However, Bergestel provides Ange with an unfortunate rule for herself. In order to remain in the realm of the witches, and by Battler's side by proxy, she cannot name herself as Ange Ushiromiya. She can only call herself by a different name, deciding to call herself Gretel, even despite Battler thinking that it would be Ange in front of her due to the similarities. Giving Battler a demeaning speech in an attempt to rile him up for the game to come and finally put an end to Beatrice and her magical torture once and for all. Battler taking it in stride and preparing himself for one more game against the witch's side, having gotten his sister as his confidant this time in Virgilia's stead. And so, the fourth game begins with renewed confidence, leading back to the familiar island of Rokkenjima at last after much build-up to this point, through flashbacks and flash-forwards. We even speedrun through a lot of the setup of what we already know of the opening to this point. There's the obvious offspring getting along at the beach, the parents all bickering over matters of the inheritance, of which Meta Battler brings up a point from the ending move, indicating that Kinzo wasn't ever a part of the 18 people that were alive. Beatrice, however, denying any information on the matter when Battler asks for her to repeat as such in red. As Ange points out, her plan is to use it to crush him when it really matters most, and not use it willy-nilly. Ange making it clear as such that she is only doing so to preserve her own fury than to confirm anything for Battler, in case it hadn't been figured out by this point. However, this is when we are given the counterpoint to Beatrice's red truth in the form of blue truth to be used as a means to counter any statements made and read by Beatrice to falsify them. Utilizing the blue truth to declare it as such, but for his theory on Kinzo not being alive, and therefore not a part of the 18 humans on Rokkenjima. As this fury is brought forward, the events on the board continue alone, Maria being brought inside by Rosa, seemingly a bit more nurturing and calmer compared to her previous times of bringing her inside after their tiff. Thankfully we don't see that part this time, but Ange's reaction to seeing this more romanticized version is basically speaking for all of us by now. And, almost immediately, we're thrown back to pre-October 1986. Ange narrating about the home life situation with Rosa being a lot more unfortunate than just the abuse she felt in public with their outbursts, that Maria was doing all she could in order to be a good girl at home for Rosa, at least for what it looked like in her journal. However, it does show once more Rosa's more conflicted nature, as it's mentioned that Rosa does love her throughout it despite being the more troubling parts of it at times. Sakutaro even confiding in Maria as such to remind her of this. Stop. Even after this, Maria and Sakutaro's following antics are commented on by Ange, who unfortunately tells us that Rosa's overworking made her neglect Maria and, by extension, when Rosa returns finding the slightest inconvenience, she immediately glares at Maria as a result, making it clear something bad is to come as a result. And even commenting for those who see it without love that Rosa didn't love her in the slightest, that she selfishly ignored her daughter and left her alone, Mammon calling her out on this as such when she rereads through the pages, indicating that she doesn't find any happiness in what Maria is writing. Seriously, stop this. You have to know what's coming up, Witch.
I cannot stop it, even if I wanted to. Those who know of the story know it as well as you do. There is no escaping this.
God damn it all. It's after this that we come to a 1-2 punch of some of the most upsetting and heartbreaking moments in the entire series as a result, especially of the question arcs, as we come to the moment that Ange has been leading us up to, the moment that she was cast out as a witch and became the cynic we know her as now. As, during one of the most cruelest bits of bullying from her classmates happens, her being made to write an apology essay for them and read it out in front of the class, forcing her to redo it to their whim until she is made to say the most demeaning and hurtful stuff about her own self, being unable to do so. And once it becomes violent enough that they pull off her hair ties from Battler, asking why she is even alive and for her to simply kill herself, is where the past Ange finally snaps and through broken tears asks the stakes to kill her classmates for her. And when they state that they are unable to do so, Ange simply stops believing in their power and the magic brought out through Maria's journal, and one by one, she crumbles them all to dust until Mammon only remains. And even when she is unable to do so, in a way not too dissimilar to a betrayal out of a shoujo manga, with Mammon having to play it up like she never really was her friend and was faked the entire time, does she too falls the same fate as all the rest of the stakes. And as if to twist the knife further, Maria and Sakutaro appear shortly after to try and comfort Ange in this matter, only for her to harshly deny Sakutaro's living spirit as a familiar to Maria, reverting him back to a doll, upsetting her in a mirror to how she treated Ange when the two were younger. Maria being so distraught that she separates Ange from Mariage Sorcery in tears. Broken, alone, and absolutely defeated, Ange simply asks for someone to kill her so she no longer has to live anymore. That alone would be absolutely horrible to try and sit through, especially given how broken the Ange of that period of that time ends up being. But as if it wasn't enough to have to sit through Ange's darkest hour, we're immediately thrown into Maria's darkest hour by comparison. This isn't funny anymore, Witch! Don't make her have to go through with this!
Do you really think I enjoy this? I may be cruel, but I'm not without a heart.
You don't get it. This is too much for us. You're asking to dance for your own sick pleasure. Broken-hearted by the events that transpired from Maria's last visit to see Ange, one of which was dissimilar to how she denied magic to Maria and Sakutaro as a result, her journal shows us a series of events which show Maria's sense of purity regarding magic begin to fade, eventually leading to a moment where, after a welfare officer is called to Rose's residence, the unthinkable begins to happen in the moments to follow. Stop it! Rosa begins to yell at Maria like we have seen her do until this point in the events of Rokkenjima, picking apart and destroying all of Maria's friends that she has collected over the years and displayed as her familiars, stating that it's all happening because she disobeyed her orders. Rosa then begins to try and get her to stop saying "ooh" again, like we're seeing up until now. Maria finally telling that it's apparently a magic word to make her happy again. And when she mentions magic to her, Rosa loses it entirely. Stop! Please! Rosa then snatches up Sakutaro from Maria's arms, blaming him for all of this happening in the first place. Stop! She then takes her hands on either side of his body and then rips him apart in front of Maria, her visualizing it as though Sakutaro's human body has been ripped in two by Rosa, her telling Maria that Sakutaro is dead. Stop it! Stop showing us this! What the hell is the reason for having to make us sit through this all again? Just to suffer?
Dear reviewer, you had an entire year to steel yourself for this moment. Please do not act as though you were not prepared for this to happen.
No, fuck you. You have no idea what this is to us. Why this hurts the way it does. Why looking at this poor girl suffering makes us anguish so badly.
If you truly do not wish to discuss these moments regarding Maria, you do not have to. However, it will be a violation of the rules of our game, leading to your disqualification and therefore leading to your demise. Tell me, is it really worth having to give up your being just so you do not have to talk about these small moments about one little girl?
One little girl? Who the fuck are you? And what have you done with Beatrice? Because this isn't just some little girl. This is...
Why don't you want to talk about Maria?
Excuse me?
Maria knows you've been skipping them for a reason!
It's not that simple of a reason, Maria. It's really hard to talk about for us because...
Why don't you talk about Maria?
Because you remind us a lot of us when we were younger.
During our retrospective look at Higurashi a year ago, we made the comment of Sadako Hojo's storyline as being one of the more uncomfortable bits in the Higurashi story as a whole. It pertained to the topic of child abuse in visceral detail, us even commenting that as a survivor of child abuse in my life, we related too much to Sadako and Higurashi as a result. In the time since we wrote that video, we've been able to learn that the reason why it was so well written and so well done is due to the fact that Ryukishi actually worked in social work for a period of time before he made it big as a writer that we know him now as, having used his experience in the field to affect Sadako, and yes, even Maria's storylines due to how much it affected him. But while Sadako's storyline does hit home for us in a way due to how it showed the effects of traumatic PTSD within children, and how it most likely affected us back then as how it has today, Maria's storyline in Umineko hits home in a way because it showcases the child abuse of a neurodivergent child. And yes, in case it needs to be said, fucking content warning for the obvious stuff ahead. It's no secret by this point that we have established our past as a child abuse victim as much as we are neurodivergent who found out only in her adulthood what she had to deal with in life. I went throughout my entire life until I was 23, constantly feeling like I was different, but I somehow knew it was being neurodivergent that was it, but I couldn't prove it. And seeing characters like Maria Ushiromiya both made me feel seen as much as it did make me feel uncomfortable at times. Because I have no idea what it was, but I felt a connection to her some 15 odd years when I read Umineko for the first time. And now, some 15 years later, knowing the truth of our own childhood and what we went through and knowing that we related to her because of the obvious reasons to us now, it fucking hurts to have to read this entire section again because we lived through this. We lived through living with a parent like Rosa Ushiromiya, someone who on the surface seemed like she was so loving and caring as could be, when on the inside she's twisted and hurt and is so susceptible to spreading that hurt on those she calls her offspring that it's impossible to truly find any love within her that feels pure or genuine.
And really, their trouble dynamic has been shown as tenuous at best at times, from the first 3 episodes showing her near bipolar levels of outbursts towards of physical abuse towards Maria, or things that any decent or loving parent would have had the urge to try and work through calmly, it happening once per episode to the point that it felt like Andy getting slapped in Utah. And while she hasn't done any physical damage to Maria in this part, she's done far worse, as she's hurt her in a way that children like Maria, neurodivergent children, mind you, take the most damage from. Psychological damage by destroying something she loved dearly, saying it's dead, and blaming Maria for it. On top of that, she's called Maria a burden several times up until this point. claiming she is the reason that Rosa couldn't have a husband, something no child should ever have to fucking hear from their parent. Sure, there's comments from George that she was trying to love her because she didn't love her to begin with, that show Rosa as being a painfully tragic person behind her abuse of Maria, or that she saved Maria in Turret's finale, and that she should be celebrated for that because she was the badass Rosa Musso. But as we've established by now, it's a forgery made by someone claiming to be Beatrice, probably in an attempt to try and make Rosa seem better than she truly is. It isn't as noble or kind as one may think. And it's made worse. All the more fucking worse by how Maria is depicted as a neurodivergent child compared to the other offspring. From the way they all comment on her being more childlike, like she's still the same that she was when they last saw her 6 years prior at 3 years old, taking so literally that she actually stayed in the garden when told to do so by Rosa, to the way that her obsession with magic is to a point of her being hyperfixated, her magic word of ooh being a fucking verbal tick that she constantly says to try and hide behind her hyperfixation, to the fact that she refers to herself in third person constantly. The signs are all fucking there that Maria Ushiromiya is somewhere on the neurodivergent scale. And as a result, it makes her treatment by Rosa so much more worse, especially in this moment where, even if it's exaggerated, it's still clear that Rosa did the damn act of ripping apart the stuffed toy she made for Maria in a fit of anger and then blamed her neurodivergent child for it to make her behave.
I will keep it brief. Regardless of what happens later on, the truth of it all is that Rosa Ushiromiya is a fucking awful parent in these moments, and the way she treats Maria at even the slightest inconvenience like a welfare call is abhorrent. And it has made revisiting Umineko something I both love and fear so much because of what I know comes in these moments. Knowing exactly what comes of Maria's story in these first 4, and knowing how much it fucking hurts to see it happen again now that we've come out from the other end of it.
There's your answer. That's why we didn't wish to talk about Maria like this.
Oh, don't cry, Miss Reviewer. Maria is fine. See? She made it through what happened to her just fine. After all, Miss Reviewer, you haven't gotten to the good part. The part where Maria gives Mama what she deserves!
That's also not a part we look forward to, Maria. And it's only made worse further in the moments to follow, as in her grief she tries to summon Beatrice to help revive Sakutaro, Beatrice having to tell Maria that as it was created by Rosa, she cannot revive him so long as Rosa denies his existence as being alive. Heartbroken, Maria finally gives in to her more evil desires, asking Beatrice to teach her magic in order to kill Rosa herself as revenge for killing Sakutaro and denying his existence. Beatrice relenting in her own grief to teach Maria this magic. Cutting back to Ange in the meta world, reading the journal for herself when she's interrupted by one Lambda Delta, entering to rub salt in her wound by stating that Banquet had lied to her about finding a fragment where her family comes home, making her realize that as much as Ange will wish for Battler to come home, it won't be for this Ange Ushiromiya. It will be for an Ange of Ushiromiya of that fragment that Banquet finds only, stating that the only way she could be with Battler forever is by keeping the game in an endless tie forever, breaking Ange down even further than before. And you'd be forgiven for forgetting that in the midst of all of this, we still have to address the first Twilight's murders. We go back to the game board at this moment, the evening and the first night of October 4th going into place, the aftermath of dinner going down as the offspring move to the guest rooms, discussing how they've been going with their respective love interests while the adults discuss regarding the events of what has happened. Puzzlingly, Maria in this version of events states that it wasn't Beatrice who gave the umbrella, but rather it was Kinzo who had done so, starting to query his absence from the evening's affairs as if he was able to be preoccupied with charming Maria in such a way. But then, As Genji comes in standing for them to seat, just as they were thinking that his arrival wouldn't occur, Kinzo finally shows his face to his offspring after 3 game boards of keeping himself scarce. Stating his disappointment, he proclaims that the epitaph was his way of deciding his successor in the family, declaring that as nobody has solved it, that none of the ones apart from Kraus in immediate succession will claim the rank of heir, but neither will Kraus. Admonishing him and the rest of his offspring in quick succession, he claims that none of them had done anything to prove themselves as the next head of the family. The line of the Ushiromiya is ending with him. Either way it's shown in the medium, it shows Kinzo at his most insane, with his eyes literally looking like they're going to bulge out from his skull. However, once Nando brings up the fact that they provided him with grandchildren, while he initially dismisses the notions entirely, he decides that instead of having his own offspring succeed him, maybe their own could prove themselves instead. But they are not freed from Kinzo's grasp just yet, as he claims them to be the first part of his ritual for Beatrice's revival, summoning the Shiestas alongside a new Shiesta, Double O, to kill their choice of that presented at the first 6 sacrifices of the first Twilight. Natsuhi, Rudolph, Rosa, Hideyoshi, Genji, and Eva all are killed as their selection. The rest, panicking of what has just transpired, are further confused by the arrival of Virgilia and Rodolph, alongside them a new character to the Rogues Gallery in Gap. All 3 of them referring to Kinzo as Goldsmith, his sorcerer's name, as Gap disappears remaining offspring to another area of the mansion entirely, Kinzo declaring his game to have begun. Beatrice once again going back to the design of the first game's Twilight's deaths, wherein the faces were disfigured during this killing, but only half of them to have her cake and eat it too without resorting to the red truth. However, just as we're getting back into the game, we're thrown into a sidebar, returning us back to the scene that we were teased with earlier, as seemingly happening after Rosa's death, but more likely as a fantasy sequence that happens shortly after Maria's last journal entry, we see her get her revenge. To be clear from this, from everything involving the scenery, the fact that Beatrice is present, and the fact that everything in regards to where it takes place is very vague at best, it's most likely her most darkest wants and desires made manifest through this fantasy. And while Beatrice is there alongside her, it's visually made clear that she is not enjoying anything about this. She never intended for Maria to learn anything about the darker, more hateful side of magic from her, and the fact that she is indulging it to such a cathartic degree doesn't bring her joy at any point. But then again, neither is Maria happy about this either. She knows deep down that what she is doing will bring back Sakutaro. It won't undo the damage Rosa has done until this point, and it's only further scarring the wound made by his loss and Rosa's lack of care. But Maria doesn't care. She outright declares that Rosa deserves what she's getting in any version you experience this in. You see the pain in her expressions at every single point. You can feel the anguish that she feels knowing that none of this will do any good. But it's all she has left. And I do want to give a special shout out to Yui Horie's performances in both the anime and in the sound novels. She's no stranger to scenes like this given her pedigree, and her voicing of Maria has been impeccable up until this point. But this scene in particular mixed in with her anguished cries from Maria just make it all the more haunting. What makes it even more haunting is the way that Maria sees this moment as her further ascension into the world of witches. All the while, Beatrice is most likely ashamed and upset to have this be her proper introduction to it all, to see her apprentice fall so far from where she began. But at the same time, she can't help but look on and support her apprentice, because in reality, compared to everything, Maria is probably the closest thing she's got to a friend at this point, given how close they've been until now. Sure, she may have gotten friendly to Battler back in Banquet, but Maria is the one person she doesn't have to fear being scolded from. She's only obsessed with her even at her lowest, so she'll support her and allow her to be happy, even if it's in the worst way possible, because in the grand scheme, she feels she's all she has in the end. Returning from this sidebar, we go back to the matter at hand as Goto and Kumasawa find the offspring. All the while, the remaining parents and servants try to reach through to their offspring to warn them of what is to come. However, they are trapped in the dungeons of Rokkenjima, awaiting their fates. Goldsmith and his troop then come to assert them of their fates as sacrifices, Kraus being demanded to call them and lock Kumasawa and Goda in the shed, the rest of the remaining parents talking to their children one by one, with George, Jessica, and Battler making a pact that whoever gets in socks Kinzo in the face. all the while Maria still plays for the side of magic. Jessica and George are both called on first in separate matters to be tested by Rodolph and Gap respectively, being given a question to answer and determine if they are truly worthy of becoming heir, and choose between their lives, their loved ones' lives, or everyone else's lives as sacrifice. Kids are declaring there to be no given correct answer, and that he only wishes to know their specific answer. Jessica choosing to sacrifice herself for everyone else's sake, while George chooses to sacrifice everyone for his and Shannon's sake. However, George and Jessica flip the script on their respective opponents in Rodolph and Gap respectively, with George indicating that he will choose to kill all of the demons before ever sacrificing any of his family, and Jessica declaring her answer was from her as a girl, with her answer as the head being to simply kick their asses entirely. What follows is a duel between both parties, a more action-oriented affair compared to what we've seen up until this point, combined as both a battle of human strength versus human trickery in physical form versus it just being portrayed as within metatextual stuff. As a result, there's not a lot I can really talk to you about here that wouldn't be repetitive after a while, except it shows the arguable best moments of George and Jessica as humans, and arguably gives them the most agency than at any point in the Umineko story period, and is a highlight for certain if you enjoy their arcs.
Some people also consider this the apex of the storylines revolving around them, and their partners in Shannon and Canon as the reasoning for them fighting so hard stems from their love of their respective partners. I wouldn't necessarily say that, mind you, as I feel like the peak of this comes from Dawn of the Golden Witch, but we'll touch upon that more when we get to it next year.
The ending of this fight does have some magical bollocks coming in that mirrors their partners in Love's abilities, George getting a magic barrier to deflect magic attacks, and Jessica's fist becoming engulfed in fiery like magic like Canon's sword. All the while as this happens, the remaining humans locked up underground make a daring escape, as Shannon and Canon is leading the charge to get them out. However, they get stopped by Virgilia and the Siesters, who aim to ensure they do not escape alive. From here, the battles work on a rotation. Between the three, we see a flurry of magic and physical attacks as each side of the human element aims to fight for their continued survival in the face of the magic side's dominance, providing the readers a break from the tense parts and density of previous parts, which were technically drama-heavy until this point.
Some call this a bit of a cheap thing to do after the first 3 parts of focusing on logic battles over physical battles. But trust me when I say, given how dense and absolutely batshit crazy the logic battle will become in later installments, I say take this as a moment of reprieve how you can, because God help you, you're not going to get one of these again until Twilight of the Golden Witch.
Unfortunately, it comes to an end in dramatic fashion, with George and Jessica both thinking they have the upper hand against their opponents, only for Rodolph and Gap to use their abilities and have George and Jessica impale on each other on their strikes, killing them instantly and serving as the second Twilight's kill. Rodolph reviving Jessica's spirit to allow her to reflect, making a call to battle to warn him of what's to come. Shortly thereafter, the rest of the humans manage a daring escape through the pipes but are killed at the last minute by the stakes, Kyrie delivering a call to Balor to do the same as Jessica, spurring him on further. However, before we get any kind of conclusion on the game board, we travel back to current day 1998, rejoining Ange and Amakusa as they travel to Rokkenjima in the continued search for Ange's answers on the truth of the massacre, stating that it's a way for her to apologize for Maria in some form or another. Alongside this plea, she manages to resummon Sakataro and the Seven Stakes, mending the broken bond they once had, at least tentatively, linking back some events from extended as strange members of the family with messages stated to be from the witch. Ange believes this to be taunts from the witch herself, and using it as a jumping off point to get to Rokkenjima herself. Back in 1986's game board, the only two remaining are Battler and Maria of the family, something of which has arguably been a constant throughout this point in every game made by Beatrice until now. And while we'll be covering its importance more later on in the finale of this, it only serves a greater purpose overall narratively.
See, my personal theory here is that Beatrice keeps the two most closest to her alive at the end of every game that she runs. Maria for the already established connections due to her belief in magic and as her apprentice, but Battler as well due to her want to be closer to him for one reason or another. As well, George and Jessica are also with them alongside Natsuki in Legends finale as being alive. It later is revealed that Jessica and George died mysteriously in the victims list, with only Maria and Battler being either granted access to the Golden Land or being offered to it by the end. This The only change in this so far is when Beatrice has been hijacked in her game by Evatrice as the Game Master, where in a moment of complete malice she kills Maria and Rosa together on the second twilight of Banquet to rid Maria from the game entirely. Battle is still, however, being the last victim of Eva before she leaves the island. So, Maria and Battle being the last two alive here was no coincidence. It was practically her showing her hand early on as to why she values the two of them so much. Alongside that, with Balor being the closest connection to Ange, who Maria has a troubled history in the 6 years Balor was away for, only give more credence to this theory among many others. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. Let's press on.
Maria is then called on by Kinzo to perform her task, but following on from this, Battler is given another call from a very familiar sound on the other line.
Congratulations!
Beatrice is waiting on the line for him, taunting him for everything that has led up until this point. Battler snapping almost immediately at Beatrice for being toyed with her for so long, being called to the front of the mansion to meet with Beatrice while Kinzo does Maria's test, finding Kumasawa and Gerda in the shed having hung themselves before he does so. And it's here where things completely shift as a result. As, while Beatrice comes to the occasion fully prepared to do her same tricks as usual, even giving the same level of sass to Battler as she looks down at him from the balcony of the mansion, the tension in the air is thick, and you think we're going to finally get the one-on-one showdown between the two the same way we've been seeing with the other siblings until now. But, as Battler is given a similar offer to what the others were given, but the name of his loved one is blanked out, do we begin to properly understand the circumstances when he throws the paper away and is instead asked his true question. What was the sin Battler Ushiromiya committed 6 years ago? While Battler initially believes it to be the fact that he left the family 6 years ago and, as a result, broke the hearts of many people within it before he returned home as the prodigal son of Rudolph after he got on his knees and apologized to him for marrying Kyrie after Asamu's death, Beatrice, however, states, coldly, that isn't his sin. It's then that we cut back to the meta world at last. Beatrice and Battler are the lone people at the table, Battler in confusion on what is happening to this point, feeling like Beatrice is getting him to atone for something he did to her specifically. Beatrice only replying that Battler's sin is causing the deaths on Rokkenjima. And while Battler takes that literally to mean that Beatrice is saying that he is in fact the killer, a popular theory that came out around the time of Alliance's release leading to the theory which would cause the creation of an entity known as a Black Battler as an alternative iteration of him in many circles, even registered officially in certain media of Umineko. Beatrice, however, states that it isn't literal like that, but that she literally means that the sin Battler committed 6 years ago was the cause of whoever is the culprit of the murders on Rokkenjima to go into effect, meaning that Battler's return to Rokkenjima was partially the cause of it. Beatrice doesn't state it in red. She doesn't have to. Her demeanor to Battler by this point has made it clear, leaving Battler in the rain outside as she decides that she's had enough, even burning Kinzo alive when he attempts to lift up her spirits when she comes back in a sour mood, the rest of her troop leaving shortly thereafter. Cutting back to the meta world, Beatrice simply walks away from the game board, telling Battler that she is done with the game. Not resigning, just ending her engagement with it. In her own words, she's eternally abandoning the game. No actions will be taken past her turn as nothing more will happen, trapping Battler in limbo. When Battler realizes this, he and the rest of those present, Bird and Lambda Delta included, protest on the matter. It's only when Beatrice starts to question Battler's validity as really being Battler Ushiromiya do we finally have the other shoe drop and another big mystery unveiled. As Beatrice declares in red, with Battler repeating it that while he is Battler Ushiromiya, he isn't the child of Asamu Ushiromiya, who Beatrice declares as being the only partner that she finds fit to be on the other end, and trying to stop her from doing so but is stopped in the middle of lest she be disintegrated. Beatrice going as so far as to state that Rudolph probably planted a body double in place of the real Battler to bring him to the island in place of the real Battler, another popular theory for around the time of Alliance's release, which, once again, was found to be used in here as a result, in chilling degree in the manga form where we straight up see a face-off moment in the visuals. With the game abandoned, her opponent essentially erased from existence through her own truth on the matter, and everyone still protesting being told to leave, Beatrice runs off, confiding in Maria, her only confidant left, and secluding herself away. Meanwhile, back in current day 1998, Ange arrives on Rokkenjima, exploring the island's area for herself, even finding her way around the island until she reaches a cliffside area, believing it to be the link between the two times of 1986 and 1999, attempting to call out to Maria in atone for what she said, finally realizing that magic cannot be seen without pure and true love. In return, however, she's met by Kasumi and her men, who tracked and followed her to the island in question, seeing Ange as her way to be able to properly get her revenge against Kyrie, who she feels abandoned the Sumadera family to be with Rudolph and the Ushiromiyas. Ange being beaten down and demeaned as Kasumi states that Kyrie took her life away from her, planning to kill her properly to spite Kyrie in the afterlife, finding a similarity to the way that Eva grieved for her own loss and took it out on her as a result. Ange decides to be more like Maria in how she broke the bonds of misery and abuse instead. However, she sees Beatrice alongside Kasumi, finally seeing her as a part of her understanding of magic at last, seeing her as the reason for why Eva was as cruel as she was due to her influence, by extension seeing her as the one influencing Kasumi's hatred as well for her. It's only when they grab Maria's journal, mocking both her and Maria for the comments within it, even after taking all the physical abuse she can from Kasumi and her men, after seeing her and Beatrice mock Maria's book, ripping out the pages and mocking her words in a way similar to how Ange was treated at St. Lucia, does Ange finally decide to fight back. Summoning all 7 stakes of purgatory to defend herself, she dares Kasumi's men to shoot her, but when they do, they end up bouncing off of her to the shock of Kasumi, her men, and Beatrice. That Ange's power has grown so strong in such a short period of time, thanks to Maria's journal. Kasumi's men being slaughtered because they cannot see it. Without love, magic cannot be seen after all, leaving Kasumi and Beatrice by extension the only 2 remaining in Ange's way. Kasumi suffering an end due to her wants for senseless revenge, in essence hatred consuming her, meeting her end by Mavin's hand directly, leaving only Beatrice, who takes the form of Eva in her younger years, at the moment she killed the rest of the family to taunt over Ange for not being able to properly forgive her. However, Ange's will wins out, the manifestation of Eva having her rifle backfire, Mammon in reality having the rifle cut in 2 to slaughter Beatrice in the process, seemingly letting go of her hatred for Aunt Eva as well, as she tells the manifestation brought about by Beatrice to go away once and for all. It's then that we see Ange be sent back to the time of her leap and meeting Bernkastel, properly confirming that she has finally understood the true meaning of magic, properly understanding her purpose as a witch herself. She then sends herself to the hiding place where Beatrice has been hiding herself with Maria, fully intent on freeing Battler from this purgatory state alongside it, deciding the only way that she is able to stop this from happening is to tear apart the Golden Land that the two have created, and, in doing so, mentions the one name that cannot be mentioned to Maria, Sakutaro, when saying that she could revive anyone she likes in this world they created, stating to Beatrice that if she were a real witch, she could revive Sakutaro herself. Beatrice, feeling threatened when Ange states that she will never revive him for her, being unable to cope with the idea of the escape of the world she created being of the 2 torn apart, tries to keep Maria from seeing it. But Ange does it. She revives Sakutaro. In reality, however, Ange didn't have to revive Sakutaro, as Sakutaro wasn't something that was made by Rosa, and therefore when she denied his existence killed him forever, as Ange had found a lot of mass-manufactured lion plushies of the same kind as Sakutaro on the island's storage in Rokkenjima. Sakutaro being handmade by Rosa was only believed by Maria because Rosa said it. When Ange spoke the truth into the world, she was allowed to be able to resurrect him, as she found love in what Rosa had gave her. Despite her outbursts, she wanted Maria's love however she could, even if she had to lie and say that she made something she gave her to get it from her. We'd love to be able to see if one can truly find where Rosa's true nature in between all of the awfulness of herself can be seen. Maria, overjoyed, declares Ange as a true witch, the witch of resurrection, able to revive those who are unable to be revived. Even though Beatrice tries to deny it as such with her red truth, she is unable to do so, pained in her inability to deny this revival where she failed. Ange telling her that it isn't just love that causes magic, that without the human elements that come from anger, sadness, and yes, especially love, magic cannot be seen. Marriage Sorcerer's Golden Land crumbles from this, returning the two to the meta world properly, Burn finding Battler who disappeared from despair. However, Beatrice is still unwilling to battle him, determined that he isn't Battler Ushiromiya. Ange, however, says that he can be worthy of playing if he's the grandson of Kinzo and the son of Rudolph, both of which Beatrice doesn't deny in red, helping his soul come back slowly but surely. However, while his soul does return slowly with Ange's help, his spirit is broken, the strain of everything he has been through having been too much to bear for him, even thinking Ange as Gretel is another delusion by him, stating he cannot trust anything not in red. Ange, desperate, makes one final gambit, using the red truth to state that she is Ange Ushiromiya and to beg for him to return to her, reminding him of the reason he began this battle with Beatrice in the first place, to return to his family, and his sister in the process. However, it comes at a cost. As Ange has revealed her secret to Battler, she begins bloodily disappearing from the world of the witches. Her one condition having been broken, she gives Battler one final rousing speech to ensure he takes it seriously and finally beats Beatrice once and for all. Spurred on by her description about how Ange was literally torn apart by her speaking of her true nature, mixed in with Beatrice's stating that he will never return to her, Battler steels himself one more time, stating he will finally end the game between the two of them once and for all, for his and Ange's sake. At this point, we finally get insight into Beatrice's mind of what is happening as she relays much of the same, that the only way the two of them will probably be able to be freed is by one absolute checkmate. No more stalemates. The two, absolute in their mission statements, Beatrice daring for Battler to kill her once and for all tied up with a series of messages that seem to either be from Beatrice herself and her conflicted nature, or the true culprit hiding themselves as her. Declaring statements as never wanting to be born, not being able to find love, asking why he had to come back, and finally begging for Battler to kill her and find her true identity once and for all, otherwise he will die. All of which are not shown in the anime, to an absolute shame due to how much it ramps up the tension. The final showdown between Battler and Beatrice begins. We return to the game board one final time, Battler remaining on there after Beatrice's refusal of him in the game, almost crossing over to October 6th at midnight. Battler proceeds to go through the entire mansion and finding one by one his family members murdered, Maria's body the only one found in peace, if poisoned. Making notes of everything in the house and the conditions of every family member and servants' bodies when they were found, Battler on the game board believes the final words they all gave to him about believing in witches and magic before their deaths to be a conspiracy to force him into believing. However, time passes. Battler gets drunk, Beatrice finally shows herself to him at last, their final duel finally coming to a head. From here, Battler goes down the line of every mystery from every game they have played, going back to Legend and his inability to solve it, starting it off by restating that Kinzo is dead at the beginning of every game, meaning that there can only be 17 members of the Ushiromiya family alive on the island. With the 18th person X established, he tries to navigate to turn and his inability to solve the sealed rooms Beatrice tried to counter that Rosa had the keys in turn. However, Battler counters, with Rosa being their accomplice, doubling down on Eva in Banquet, with Nanjo's murder being done by the 18th person who she worked with. Battler working with Blue Truth after Blue Truth to work it that an 18th person was either responsible for the murders or was an accomplice to said murders by someone else who lived after the fact. However, Beatrice keeps the pressure on to Battler, reminding him that Kinzo did show his face to them, only for Battler to reply he could have been a body double, but even after Beatrice declaring nobody would mistake a faker for Kinzo, he states that due to alterations made by Beatrice in previous games such as the Master Keys changing between all three, he deduces Kinzo's status could have been one as well. Beatrice confirms, however, that Kinzo's status doesn't change between all four games. Until he's confirmed dead in any of them, he's very much alive. This taking the form of Kinzo becoming a dragon to threaten Battler's chances at success. Balor retorting in blue that Kinzo's name is a title in the same way of Beatrice's. The true Kinzo is dead, and whoever assumed his name is shown as such. Moreover, he states in blue that Kinzo Ushiromiya is already dead in every game from the beginning, unfortunately making the events of Legend very saddening, which we will come to find as a result of these actions of further games has further ripple effects. For now, however, it kills the metaphorical dragon known as Kinzo while keeping his arguments alive. It's then when Balor goes for the jugular onto Beatrice directly, stating that the deaths of all who died in the most recent game were caused by Person X, disguised as Kinzo, who most likely orchestrated them all, piercing Beatrice in place as Balor declares a checkmate on. As she lies on the spikes that signifies Balor's blue truth piercing her, Balor declares it to be over. Beatrice trying to get him to see her not as the witch, but as the culprit, trying one final time to reach him as who she truly is, before deciding that he cannot be reached in this manner, that she isn't seen as a human by him any longer. Beatrice, as a result, falls into the persona in full once more, declaring in red that yes, Kinzo is dead at the beginning of every game, but that there are no more than 17 humans on the island of Rokkenjima, meaning Person X is out of the question. Balor then runs the gauntlet on a surface level only on the rest of the Twilights from Legend through to Alliance's games, only stating smaller issues for Legend that they could have been in any of the previously killed without an alibi. While it is accepted as a very flimsy premise on all involved, even when he has to go for more expanded ways to explain the likes of Canon's death as an accident. This continues throughout all of the mysteries surrounding the murders on each game board, with each theory surrounding the magic involved in the games from turn onwards needing to be explained alongside how the humans would have murdered each other, with highlights being the eternally mean small bombs in the food theory to explain Turn's first Twilight, gas being used to kill those in the locked rooms, which instantly falls apart by Beatrice for Banquet's first Twilight, and finally, solving Nandra's murder in Banquet by stating one person might have played dead to kill him while Eva killed Battler. The final line of defense with Nandro keeping the legend of the witch alive, Beatrice is properly pierced by Battler's blue truth, and then stabbed over and over by subsequent blue truths after the fact. Beatrice is properly, actually, defeated by Battler this time. However, Beatrice is unable to die. Despite having her witch form pierced entirely, the true mystery surrounding who she is truly on the mystery of Rokkenjima has yet to be properly solved, as even she asks of Battler to find out who she truly is. Battler holding Beatrice in his arms, taking her final request into mind as he continues on his search for the truth. He killed the witch, but it didn't bring him harm. He's still stuck in purgatory, but his goal has now changed to figure out who truly caused the Rokkenjima massacre, now that the illusion has been killed by his hands. But that isn't the end of our story here, as Alliance of the Golden Witch still has a witches' tea party for us to attend, sending us to Burncastellan Land of Delta's hiding spot, laughing at the end of their game and denouncing much of Battler's theories in red. Like it was said before, it was only denounced on a surface level only, meaning that Beatrice most likely threw the game for Battler's sake to point him towards the truth of the matter. The entire experience of their exchange in this tea party establishes that they've actually been working together on the same side this entire time, manipulating the events of everything happening until this point to assure a total tie to keep Beatrice and Battler trapped in the sleuth as their playthings. Bird even stating that Beato's chances of winning are 0. Throughout all of this as well, they very much have been shown to be very Yuri bait throughout all of it in a way that they are being presented, which often has led to them both after the fact being seen as one of the bigger pairings of Umineko after the fact, to which I say we stand some good toxic Yuri. The real reason for this tea party and the finale of Alliance is to establish one simple fact. Beatrice will not win this game, and no miracle in Battler being able to save his family will occur, ending both Alliance of the Golden Witch and the question marks of Umineko off on the two of them laughing mockingly as Beatrice and Battler embrace to find the truth.
It's certainly an interesting note to end the question arcs off, for sure. Especially given the fact that, despite everything presented in this last part giving us some closure to most of the events in the first half of the story, we are still left with more questions than answers, which is to be expected for sure. But when the entire dynamic of the situation has been flipped from exposing magic and denying Beatrice to finding out the truth of Beatrice and who is the person who killed Balor's family at the very tail end, it makes everyone wonder where we're set to go. On top of that, Beatrice now being defeated and Landa and Byrne replacing her as antagonistic forces suddenly as a heel turn, which does seem to give a lot of thought on the matter as to who the audience can properly trust on the matter, and, for fans of Higurashi, ask what the hell happened to Byrne Castell as that she's turned as cruel as she is now. And, as well, Ash being listed among the dead in Alliance's epilogue being stated as having died in 1998, gives on a question as to what the hell actually happened to Ange in 1998, and what her mystery into finding out the truth herself led her if it meant her demise on Rokkenjima. Well, considering how long we took on this part of the journey, you'll have to wait a year to find out. Gather your wits and figure out the mystery for yourselves, because we're not even close to the biggest drop in the bucket when it comes to this cat box of truth. And for as much as it was fun to sit through again, the next 4 parts of the answer portion of our story will unfortunately be more heartbreaking than you may think, as in 1 year we will return to this game of witches and humans and find out the answers in End, Dawn, Requiem, and Twilight of the Golden Witch. For now, however, it's time to close up the chessboard, put the pieces away, and reconvene your moves for the games ahead, my dear audience. The Game Masters will not relent on you any further, as we slowly but surely reach our endgame and figure out the truth for ourselves.
Well, there's your first part of our game done, which I fulfilled my end of the bargain for now, and as agreed upon, we shall resume this game in 1 year to determine our winner and discuss the answer arcs with our audience.
I'm still unsatisfied with the predicament found with this. We should have been able to fit those answer arcs in if you weren't so picky about time frames, dear reviewer. We should—
That's something I actually need to bring up, Beatrice. You keep calling us reviewer. Why do you do that?
I thought I was playing with the reviewer of your collective, as per our agreement from a year ago, correct?
Correct, but here's the thing about us. We're not just the reviewer. Our piece, as you see us down there, is our little storyteller, and there's more of us in here than you may think. And we think if you were truly the Golden Witch herself, you would have deduced that we weren't just them the entire time. So, stated in red, the person in front of me right now, Beatrice the Golden Witch, is the reviewer and the reviewer alone.
I refuse to.
Now why would that be, huh? Could it be that the wording that we chose to give referred to you as Beatrice the Golden Witch, and that you cannot state it in red due to the fact that you would struggle to say it in red? That would only be the case if the being in front of me right now is faking as Beatrice the Golden Witch. Huh. Did we just use red truth there without realizing it? Things to worry about at a later date, reviewer. Regardless, if this red truth holds up, then I haven't been challenged by Beatrice, but an imposter, haven't I? So, reveal yourself to me, faker.
I didn't think you'd be able to figure it out! I thought that with all the magic toxins brought onto you so suddenly from last year's affair, you'd be stuck on this until next year's game! But yes, I'm not that pathetic little doll. I'm not even her handler. I'm
the one who's been here the whole time.
Of course it'd be you, Byrne Castell. After all, Who better to want me to have to go through all her trials and tribulations just to bring me to this point again? Huh?
It's only right that you tell my story for your masses to enjoy. Without the full context of it, it makes what's to come not as fun to relive after all.
So that's your play, huh? Constantly reliving your greatest victory just to make your fall from grace all the more easier to have to handle again. Fine then. I guess I can handle playing against you. Means I don't have to hold back anymore, right?
Oh? You were holding back this game? Then I really should have made you work for that extension some more, shouldn't I? But I'll give you your precious one-year extension to come to a consensus on Chitter. Which, don't you forget about that little promise you made. No matter the situation, no matter your circumstances, no matter what you've invested yourselves in by then, in 1 year from now, you will return to finish this game with myself, willingly or not. Is that understood by you and your collective?
Sure. Much like tonight's game, we'll be ready for whatever you throw at us. We came into this more than prepared for your trickery. I'm sure we can keep our defenses up for this next time.
Good. Then just do me one favor when you return a year from now, reviewer.
What? Want me to bring more friends next time? Want me to talk less about the side content? Which would be a shame given we still have the fighting game, and the extra arcs written by Ryukishi who released his written side pieces. Okay, what is it then, Witch of Miracles? If not all of that, what do you really want out of me next time?
Don't bore me with going easy on me. I'll ensure you submit to the whims of this game of ours, and will overwhelm you with how much you have to prepare for. Remember that when you're scurrying on all fours, begging for mercy from someone who knows not of it, little reviewer.
This video was made possible through supporter patrons like the ones you're seeing on screen right now. If you like videos like this one and others on this channel, please consider supporting them via the Patreon link and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for the time, and catch you later.